Okay, we're going to begin. Good morning and welcome to the second day of our research symposium, Plurilingualism in Language Education, organized by the Master's Program in Foreign Language Teaching and Learning at the School of Languages, Universidad de Antioquia. And I want to thank today our national and international presenters who have made part of this event. Dr. Elana Shohami from the University of Tel Aviv in Israel, Dr. Angela Chris from the University of Stirling in Scotland, Dr. Amparo Clavijo Olarte from Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas, Dr. Isabel Tejada Sánchez from Universidad de los Andes, Dr. Germana Carolina Soler, and Dr. Guillaume Roux from Universidad de Caldas, Dr. Norbella Miranda and Dr. José Aldemar Valencia, Álvarez Valencia from Universidad del Valle, and Dr. Paula Echeverry and Jaime Alonso Usma from Universidad de Antioquia. I would like to thank also our students, professors, alumni, and academic collaborators of the program and of the School of Languages for joining us again today in this research symposium. Yesterday, we had a very inspiring round of presentations. We learned about the work that our invited researchers are doing to promote bottom-up educational policies that are respectful of linguistic diversity and responsive to local needs. We learned about the issues, about the uses and investments of different languages of university students at the regional level. We learned about the implementation of a mock course on interculturality taught in different languages and its impact on graduate and undergraduate students. And we also learned about the possibilities to integrate multicultural community resources in the curriculum and to contribute to educational knowledge and teacher development. Today's presentations and conversation will focus on language learners in the UK and in Colombia coming from different ethnic communities and cultural heritages and their language learning experiences. We will learn about the use of a multilingual pedagogy in the teaching of Punjabi in Birmingham, and we will learn about the sociolinguistic and academic profiles of ethnic community students in Colombian universities, as well as their views, experiences, and challenges when learning foreign languages. So welcome to this conversation today. We are going to start with our opening talk of the day. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we start with our opening talk of the day, I would like to remind you of the procedures to bear in mind for your participation during this event. We encourage the audience on Zoom and the persons that are following the event on YouTube to participate on the chat with their questions and comments. We will be collecting all of your questions and comments from the chat to channel them to the presenters. At the end of each presentation, we will have 10 minutes to address those questions, and also we will have the chance for you to ask your questions directly to presenters. In addition, at the end of the morning, we will have a conversation session with the presenters of this morning, and there we will consider the questions that you asked in the chat and that we couldn't answer during the presentations. So we encourage you to participate very actively along the different presentations this morning. So I'm honored and very pleased to introduce you to our first presenter, Dr. Angela Chris from the University of Stirling, who kindly accepted sharing her experience and knowledge with us in this event. Dr. Angela Chris is a professor of linguistic ethnography in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Stirling. Her research interests are in sociolinguistic, multilingualism, and interaction in everyday life. She has co-written on linguistic ethnography with Fiona Copeland in 2014 and multilingualism with Adrian Blackledge in 2010. She has edited several large handbook collections on sobre diversity with Blackledge 2017, multilingualism with Martin Jones and Blackledge, and heteroglossia with Blackledge in 2010. She also published on collaborative teaching in linguistically diverse classrooms in 2008, and she is a fellow of the Academy of Social Science. In 2010, she received the Helen C. Bailey Award alumni for outstanding contribution to educational linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Angela Chris, thank you very much for being here with us today, and we are honored and very pleased to have you.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm really delighted to be here and look forward to all of the presentations. Thank you very much for sending the link from yesterday's presentations, so I was able to catch up on those too. And it just looked like a really interesting conversation and lots of interesting presentations. So thank you very much for the invite and really for organizing us so wonderfully as well. So to you and to the organizing team, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Professor Angela kindly recorded her presentation to avoid any connection problems. And of course, at the end of her presentation, she's going to be listening and answering the questions from the audience. Carlos, ¿podrías por favor poner el video de la profesora Angela? Gracias.
As I've said Sorry.
Yeah,
hello everyone. My name is Angela Crease and I am from the University of Stirling. I'm very much looking forward to an opportunity to speak today and to learn from the other presentations. I'm very familiar with the substantial work over a long period that has been going on in Colombia about bilingual education, intercultural education, and Indigenous education. So a great opportunity for me to listen in to colleagues. I'm going to start first by sharing my screen. So let me do that. And I'd like to start with a quote that I came across in one of Anne-Marie de Mejia's articles from 2006, in which she quotes Abdiou Green Stossel, who Anne-Marie says is a linguist from the NASA Indigenous community who works for the National Indian Organization of Colombia, ONIC. And Abdiou says, it is not enough to recognize the other in that dimension which interests us or which seems correct, urgent, or similar. In this case, we are looking at and projecting ourselves in the other. We are not looking at the other as different. And I start with this quote because I think when we're involved in intercultural education or education around heritage, we need to think about from which perspective we are considering the other. And Green Stossel's argument here is that we should be very careful about the subject position from which we gaze at the other. But I think he is also arguing for an account of the other as different, as individual, as unique. And of course, every individual is unique and different. And we need to keep that in mind when we use social categories and cultural categories to talk about difference. So, The literature in Colombia, as I've said, on bilingual education, of course, is vast. And I'd like to just point to two articles here, which I find particularly useful. One by Demarcate from 2006, in which, in a forerunner really to many of the arguments on translanguaging, she argues against a view of language purity in favour of bilingual proficiency and language contact, in recognition of the bilingual person's code switching potential or translanguaging potential, and instead of speaking about languages, really arguing here for a focus on the bilingual speaker's repertoire and how that repertoire is linked to a social identity. You know, so I think these arguments are very important because they're really emphasizing a notion, a multilingual version of pedagogy rather than a monolingual one. It's about all of the different resources bilingual teachers and bilingual students bring to the classrooms, and that these should be legitimated in the classroom. Luis Enrique Lopez speaks of, in indigenous everyday life, the two, or in some cases three or more languages are needed many times in connection to one another and not as discretely separate as is often supposed. You know, so again, the idea of a flexible bilingualism, not a separate bilingualism, not, you know, kind of each language being held apart, but them running into one another, a kind of really an argument that translanguaging has picked up currently. So, moving on, what I want to talk about today is a Punjabi complementary school, and I'll tell you a little bit more about complementary schools soon. Complementary schools, you know, are quite interesting places in the UK because they are bilingual or multilingual spaces, and there aren't that many in the UK in terms of educational settings. So I want to look at these three T's, as I've called them: translation, transliteration, and translanguaging. I'm going to really focus on translation here. I'll mention transliteration. Translanguaging I talked about when I was lucky enough to be invited to Cartagena in 2018 by Scopi. So when I talk about translation, I'm talking about really not so much the equivalence of one language and another in terms of kind of a language and linguistic difference, but really talking about cultural translation, how we think about moving, say, between cultures, what we think of the word culture itself, and also the idea that we translate between modalities. So we may, as a teacher, kind of be getting students to do spoken work, and then we need to translate that into written work, and the importance of the visual and the gestural. So I'm going to be focusing on translation. I will say a little bit about transliteration, particularly in the Punjabi classroom. This is important because the kids learning Punjabi are not familiar with the alphabet which is used in India, which is the Gujarati script, and instead they work through English, the Latin alphabet, in order to arrive at the Gujarati script. So transliteration is a practical strategy in contexts where the written form of a language is unfamiliar or it doesn't exist. So let me tell you a little bit about complementary schools. They are community run, so they are outside the primary and the secondary school. They're not funded by the British state. They're grassroots organisation, they're bottom-up organisations, and they come together, they're created for many different reasons. Often it is to teach a so-called community language. Sometimes it's just important for the parents to get together and provide a language environment for their children, which is outside the home. So they hear Punjabi, for example, in context beyond the home environment. And sometimes it's explicitly to teach culture and heritage. They are involved in the design and implementation of alternative educational programs. Because they are outside of the mainstream, they're able to bring to the students their own curriculum, their own materials, which they feel are important because they're not held accountable to the national curriculum. Because of that, they bring in local knowledge and histories which the teachers feel deserve specific attention, and we're going to focus on that today. They're voluntary. The children do not have to go there. The parents don't have to send them there. They can choose to send them there. Moreover, the teachers often volunteer. They may be paid, but they are paid small sums of money. They take place at the weekends and after school. Sometimes they are held in school settings. They borrow the classrooms of universities or secondary schools or primary schools, but they're not actually held during school time. They take place after school or at the weekends. The other important thing to say is that the children attending have English usually as their first language or as their dominant language, and they are learning the community language as an additional language. Since 2002, that's a typo, 2002, we've conducted at least 11 linguistic ethnographies in these schools. In the United States, they're called heritage language schools. And in Britain, we have looked at Bengali schools, Cantonese, Gujarati, Mandarin, Punjabi, and Turkish schools. So let me just show you a few pictures to give you a flavour. This is a Gujarati school in Leicester, and you'll see, and this is fairly typical, the children sitting on the floor. This is the assembly at the end of the teaching morning. At the side you see the teachers, the head teacher is speaking to all of them, and at the back you see the parents who have come to collect their children. And so the parents are very involved in these complementary schools, listening to the head teacher talk to the children and joining in the assembly. This is a Cantonese school. Many of the children come from a Hong Kong heritage, and this is taking place in a further education college in Manchester on a Sunday. This is a Gujarati complementary school again in Leicester. A Turkish complementary school in London, in which the children are borrowing a space from a London secondary school. And this is a Bengali complementary school in Birmingham using a community centre. And a Chinese Mandarin complementary school using the University of Manchester classrooms for their Sunday meetings. So we're going to look at a Punjabi language school. There are 220 students on roll. They age between 6 and 16, 20 classes, so it's a large school. They study from beginners level all the way to advanced level. Advanced level is what they need for university entrance exams. They take place on Saturday, and they're over 2 different school sites. So we conducted a linguistic ethnography, which means we collected lots of qualitative data. We did 36 classroom observations, took lots and lots of field notes. We made audio recordings. We asked the teachers and the students to wear microphones, and we recorded them both in class and out of class. We took photographs and we did some video recordings. We conducted interviews. The way we designed the study is key participants, students, and teachers and teaching assistants. So we have this notion of key participants, and we recruit students, teachers and teaching assistants to be the ones that we record during the class and after class as well. Okay, so I want to start with this notion of intangible cultural heritage from UNESCO. They define it as the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. So I think this is interesting from UNESCO. Clearly there's a distinction being made between intangible and tangible. But the idea that there are particular cultural practices, particular cultural representations, expressions, etc., which are worth preserving, is what UNESCO is getting at here. And I think this is important and very interesting for complementary schools. And as I've said, they are also known as heritage language schools, particularly in America, because what is this idea of cultural heritage that the teachers want to pass on to the students? And what do the students think of what is being passed on by the teachers? Where is the negotiation here? And it gets back to Green-Stossel's observation around difference and the way we see the other, because we're here looking at the decisions about what is important on the curriculum for the groups, these groups of teachers, volunteers who are teaching young people about Punjabi heritage. So what I want to do is really look at what the teachers decide to pass on and how the students kind of receive that or how they negotiate that. So I want to talk about 4 areas of cultural translation which we observed in the Punjabi school. So we're going to look at the teaching of kinship, forms of address, particularly to show respect, cultural change itself as an idea of something worth preserving, and pronunciation and authenticity, and particularly pronunciation as authenticity. So here we start with a screenshot from one of the Punjabi teacher classrooms in which you can see the importance given to kinship terms. So if you look down, you can see at number 4 there, husband's younger brother, husband's younger brother's wife, sister's husband to each other, mum's sister to your dad, mum's sister to you, mum's sister's husband to you, etc., etc. So a lot of attention given to the way you should address family members. And this we saw across all of the Punjabi classes. You can also see here a good example of transliteration. On the left is English and on the right is transliterated Punjabi. So that is Punjabi written through the Latin alphabet, which the students are of course familiar with because it's the same as the English alphabet. And then you see the arrow pointing up to the Gurumukhi script, which is the form of writing Punjabi in India. So this importance given to kinship terms, Aga argues, is a way to look at the complexity of social relationships. So Aga, who is a linguistic anthropologist, talks about the analysis of how kinship behaviours are performed and how this reveals much of the complexity of our social networks, our social relationships. And I think this is true too for the complementary schools or the heritage language schools, because why is it that the teachers decide it is central to teach kinship. It's somehow something about the family and about the respect that people should show to different family members. It's clearly something relevant that the teachers feel should be passed on to the students. Let's see what happens in the actual classroom. So this is a classroom audio recording in which the teacher is trying to teach these kinship terms. The others listed there, Kamal and Sahib, are students. So the teacher says, who's got an older sister? And a lot of the students say, me, me, me. And the teacher says, are they married? And Kamal says, yeah. And the teacher says, what do you call their husbands? So this is what Kamal calls her older sister's husband. And Sahib says, my mum just says it's your Paji brother. Now, Sahib says, just says, so he knows that that's not quite right because he's using the term brother to talk about his brother-in-law. So the teacher says, your older sister's husband is Jijaji. And Kamal says, Paji. So she uses what Sahib has given her. He says, oh, Jaji. Yeah, my mum says that too. Yeah, she does in Singapore. Jijaji. So she's kind of sorting it out, and she says, yeah, my mum does that. And then Sahib says a brother's wife would call the sister-in-law a nanan. So he's also kind of thinking it through and working out, wouldn't they? And Kamal says, yeah, because my mum calls my chachi nanan or Debrani. And then Sahib says, why do they make everything so complicated? So this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because you've got Sahib on the one hand kind of distancing himself. You might say he's taking a kind of subject position of a kind of majority, say, white Anglo culture, which is, that we would call everybody either brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and we wouldn't have in English all of these different categories. So when he says they, he's talking about the kind of majority, and he's not talking about the Punjabi family kinship terms. However, you might also say that both Kamal and Sahib are really engaging in the lesson and trying to work it through, and they give lots of examples themselves. They're really contributing to the lesson. Another feature that we observed in terms of intangible heritage and what the teachers thought was worth passing on was this idea of deference, politeness, respect, particularly to elders and to family members. So from the field notes we have, the teacher tells the class, in our culture, we show respect. I want to see respect when you are talking to each other. She talks about the importance of greeting people in Punjabi and says, we are not just learning language, but also culture. When you greet Punjabi relatives next time, greet them properly. So, quite a strong, kind of lesson to the students. Show respect and use the right kinship terms. The teacher says, tell me what G stands for. A child volunteers, respect. The teacher says, yes, to show respect. He illustrates this by saying, hello, Baba, hello, Mama, and points out that it just doesn't sound good. He tells his class that to make it sound better, you need to say G, and then you are being respectful of your family as well. And in the last one, a boy enters the class late and shouts out his apology to the teacher disruptively. Sorry, G, the class sniggers. So here you have, the emphasis on respect, kinship terms, politeness, especially to elders. And then you have somebody disrupting that and deciding that they're not going to be insiders in this deference to elders. So just like the last one, the students are, kind of listening to it, some taking it on, negotiating it, kind of seeing themselves in different places, from different perspectives, different subject positions in relation to what they're being taught. Another Another example comes from the teaching of history and the so-called caste system. Now, what is happening in these field notes is the teacher is using an A-level text, that is the examination text for university entrance. And the text is about the Indian caste system, the Hindu caste system, I should say, in which their castes are ranked. And she wants the students to engage critically with the text. So this is what she says. The teacher asks sorry, this is not what she said. These are my field notes of the lesson. The teacher asks in English what a girl thinks of the text. The girl replies, "I highly agree." This makes some of the children laugh. The teacher isn't happy with the answer and explains that while there are some positive things about friendship in the text, there are also some negative things, such as rich people only being friends with other rich people and not with poor people. The teacher feels very strongly about this. She turns to me suddenly in the middle of the teaching moment and asks me if I have heard of Hindu castes. I'm taken aback, but say yes. She explains that in the Punjabi community, that is in Birmingham, there are people who are still very interested in castes and only want to be friends with people from similar castes. She says it's not the children's fault, but some parents still persist. She tells the class in the multicultural West, these questions are not relevant. We should be respecting all people and not decide on friendship because of money. So here, she's really kind of moving between a traditional view of Hindu castes in India, and of course that's changing too, and she wants to emphasize to the students that in Birmingham, in England, we don't do that. We have an orientation which is around the so-called multicultural West. And it's quite interesting that she uses me as a kind of Anglo-white person in the classroom to kind of uses me to make that point to the students. So Blomat and Barris says, identities are not fixed, rather they are fast-moving, organized as a patchwork of different specific objects and directions of action. So, you can see here that the young people are negotiating their own positionality in relation to the curriculum around respect, kinship terms, and the teachers are also doing that. They are also taking a position around what they view as worth passing on. So they really resist, this teacher, at least Hema, really resists the notion of castes. The last point in terms of cultural translation is to do with pronunciation and authenticity. So the teachers place a lot of emphasis on getting the sound right of particular phonemes because that will allow the students to kind of be authentic Punjabi speakers. And one of the ways they do this is to talk about the way grandmothers, the children's grandmothers, actually pronounce some of these sounds. So these field notes, very short field notes, say, come on, pronunciation, just think how your BB would say it. This is interesting because it's about funds of knowledge. It's about saying, look, within your family, you can learn how to speak Punjabi. Even if you don't speak it now, you can ask your grandmother, who will be a great role model for good pronunciation. But also, it's a way of I think I've said kind of reinforcing what good pronunciation is, because this idea of getting certain sounds right is important. So here we're going to listen to a short extract within the class. Here the teacher is called Hema, and the others are students. And the teacher, Hema, has been asking the students to come up with sounds which make this long E sound. So li, re, is what Prabjot, one of the students, says. She says Lee Ray. And Hema says, which one? And Prabjot says again, Lee Ray. And Hema thinks she says leader, which is, you might say, an English word, but there's quite a lot of code switching or the use of, say, English and Punjabi text, because that's the way English and Punjabi kind of operate together, both in Birmingham, but also in the Punjab. Hema says leader, as in leader. And the student keeps repeating Lee Ray. And Kirat says, Lee Ray, miss. He's saying Lee Ray, clothes. And she provides the pronunciation. And Hema says, oh, Lee Ray. And Kirat says, yeah. And Hema says, Lee Ray is clothes. I have ages. And Kirat says, my grandma says it. And Hema says, where did you learn this word from? And Prabjot says, from my BB. And Hema says, from your BB? How? Okay. Have you heard it? Have you heard it? Anybody put your hand up if you have heard this word before? Prabjot, where did you hear this word from? Prabjot repeats, my BB. Your BB as well. Yeah, lire is a really traditional word for clothes. Okay, really old traditional word, lire. Now we say capre. Lire, okay, good word, well done, yeah, carry on. So here we have the enforcing again of the BB as a great example of lire, of this sound, lire. But we also have Hema teaching the less traditional word, that is the correct word, the new word, capre, but she manages to reinforce the importance of BB as well as teaching students the new term. Now, as I say, pronunciation, very important. And in this example, we have Hema working with Narinda. Now, Narinda is a newly arrived teaching assistant in Hema's class. And Hema is getting Narinda as the kind of authentic native speaker to get the students to listen to the word. She really wants Narinda to emphasize this. In the middle of the extract there, you see sade. She really wants the students to hear this sound, sade. Extracts when she says to the children, she says, okay, listen to me. Okay, when somebody's talking, you should, I told you before, when it comes to ta 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 ta, fa ta da 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 da, you look at people's lips, like how they're pronouncing this. Okay, Miss said sade. So she's really emphasizing Narinda's kind of correctness here, a kind of native speaker-ness from just derived from the Punjab. So Miss is saying sade. When you pronounce this d, when you are talking, where are you taking your tongue? Where am I taking my tongue? So sa-de, so which da da da. So she's kind of getting students to listen to do different kinds of D. Now, this extract is interesting because Hema is both including Narinda as a kind of native speaker teacher, but she's also saying to the students, look, I know the kind of errors you make. I know that as somebody living in Birmingham and who is learning Punjabi as an English speaker, you cannot hear the difference between these two Ds or these different Ts. Miss Narinda is doing it okay, but you're not. But she's saying, I know you. I know the kind of problems you face. Now, I'm quite interested then in the way that Narinda was seen within the class and the way Hema was seen in the class in teaching pronunciation. As I said, Narinda was just arrived and as a classroom assistant, I'm afraid to say that she faced some discrimination from the students, not around her Punjabi necessarily, but around her English. So let's just look at these field notes and then consider what they might mean. So a child asks Narinda for clarification about her translation from Punjabi to English. He wants to know if she said eating. Norinda repeats and says knitting, but she actually says kneeting with a long I sound. So this is the same sound of lire that we just heard. It's an important sound for the students to learn. But here, Norinda is using that long sound in English. So she says kneeting. So the young man looks a bit perplexed. And so Norinda writes the word on the board, and she writes kneeting instead of knitting. And this causes the class to snigger. The boy looks at me and smiles. I smile too. I feel really uncomfortable though, as if I'm complicit in this. I think we are all involved in this drama, although Norinda isn't aware that she has pronounced the word differently from the standard, the English standard. I feel the students positioning me as the English professor, and it's unfortunate. So, this is interesting to me because in terms of authenticity and kind of cultural translation and cultural knowledge, what seems important to the students is the kind of bilingualism that they are aspiring to. It's the kind of bilingualism that Hema has. It's a kind of bilingualism of their family. And it's a kind of bilingualism which is associated locally with life in Birmingham, the kind of community, Punjabi community in Birmingham. It is not Narinda's standard Punjabi. It has to do more with Hema's bilingualism. It's about both Punjabi, but it's also about English. And because Norinda is seen as fresh off the boat, she faces some discrimination. So, you know, again, it's about an othering of Norinda from a subject position which sees that bilingualism in both English and Punjabi is important to this group of students, not a kind of Punjabi which is associated with the kind of correct Punjabi of India. It has to be something which reflects the local context. So Glomat Ambaris says, discourse revolves around a complex and unpredictable notion of authenticity, you know. So what is authentic here is a local Birmingham Punjabi, in which it does require access and attention to Punjabi in India, but must also take into account the context that the students are learning it in. And they also say, we arrange features in such a way that they enable others to identify us as authentic, real members of social groups. So at the moment, Norinda is not a real member of the social group, and it's that authenticity which counts.
Thank you, Dr. Chris, for your for sharing this.
Excuse me, Dr. Chris is going to continue with the conclusions now before the questions. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Yes, let me just. Okay. Don't know why that's not full. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
We can see
Perfect.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to do it from the. Anyway, I think you get. There's only 3 slides, so we won't worry about the technology too much now. So I just wanted to conclude. Unfortunately, my internet collapsed just as I was about to make the conclusion. So as you can hear, I've been trying to talk about what we might understand by difference and the importance of subject positions, processes of othering, but also the importance of, you know, kind of individuals and uniqueness in terms of what people bring to teaching and learning contexts. So thinking about difference not only as a social category, but perhaps also as a moral or social response to the context in which people find themselves. So Ofelia Garcia notes that the role of educators is to notice learners' needs rather than demarcate lines between particular languages. And I use this quote because, of course, it puts the emphasis on teacher-student relationships. And it's that, I think, which I have been trying to think about in the Punjabi school. And I want to also then take us back to thinking about difference and diversity. And Glissant says, diversity is not the melting pot, the pulp, the mishmash. Diversity is differences that encounter each other, adjust to each other, oppose each other, agree with each other, and produce the unpredictable. And I think that that's what you can see happening in the Punjabi classrooms. You know, things are being negotiated, they're being resisted, they're being complied with. And I like this kind of unpredictable that Glissant mentions here. And then to finish with my colleague and friend Hemi Usma, who talks about other organizations, I guess, doing the training in Colombia, and kind of reminds us really of the threat of coloniality and imperialism. And he says, so Usma shows how the instrumental notion of Spanish-English bilingualism borrowed in the national bilingual program imposes imported discourses and practices in the country at the expense of local knowledge, and favors the consolidation of a lucrative market around language teaching, learning and certification in Colombia, in which those who benefit are again a minority. And what I end with this quote, because I think the idea of imported discourses is also something that I think my presentation also deals with to a kind of certain extent, of a kind of rarefied, so-called traditional India, which the children are asking questions about and which the teachers are asking questions about. So obviously, things are changing and they're up for debate. So I think that's where I will end there.
Thank you, Dr. Chris, for sharing this beautiful work that you have been doing with ethnographic research. We have some questions in the chat, and I would also let the audience know that you can ask your questions in the chat, and you're gonna have your microphones activated, that you can also participate with questions. So there is a question, what kind of training do teachers get to teach heritage language or culture?
Well, it's very variable, actually. So some of the complementary school teachers are teachers themselves in mainstream settings. So they are primary and secondary school teachers, and they have kind of received the same training that the government kind of sets out. Others are volunteers, completely don't have a pedagogic background and are kind of training on the job. And many of the schools themselves offer training on language, culture and curriculum. So they run their own in-service sessions. The schools are hugely variable in the amount of resource they have. So, you know, some of the schools are kind of much wealthier than others. I mean, wealthier in the sense that they have money for training, whereas others really don't have that facility. So it's very variable.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. We would like to know more about who those teachers are, like their educational background.
Well, I guess I kind of just answered that. They have a very, so for example, sometimes the teacher Hema that you saw there, she's actually a maths teacher in a Birmingham secondary school. Some of the other teachers are, it's so varied. I can't really give you an answer. They come from all kinds of different settings, different backgrounds. One of my students at the moment, for example, is doing research on Japanese complementary schools, and they are mostly mothers, for example, who really want their children to maintain Japanese and want them to be with other Japanese children in a kind of setting which is outside of the home. So there it's mostly mothers, but they are also doing the teaching in the schools. So it's such a wide variety. I mean, I suppose it's just like answering the question, where do teachers come from in any setting? They come from a really wide set of backgrounds.
Okay. We have another question about which languages are taught as part of the mandatory curriculum in elementary and secondary schools in the UK. And if there have been any attempts to include cultural heritage contents in the school curriculum.
That's an interesting question. So it's still the European languages, which are the languages most taught in primary and secondary schools in the UK. So the most popular language is Spanish. That has overtaken French, and German, for example, now is, I think, kind of struggling to get itself now taught in British universities as all of those programs are under threat. The so-called minority languages, like Punjabi, Turkish, in terms of kind of, when I say minority, of course, they're not minority in many other places, but in terms of UK setting, sometimes those languages are taught in the secondary school. They're not taught in the primary school. Sometimes they're taught in the secondary school. And teachers in complementary schools play a very important part in working with secondary schools to keep those languages on the curriculum. However, it's the case that it's only the so-called kind of children from those minority backgrounds which are encouraged to take Punjabi, Gujarati, Turkish, etc. None of the so-called majority Anglo kids are encouraged to take them. So it's kind of seen as an additional language. And in many cases, those subjects, those languages, are actually taught at complementary schools. The complementary schools teach the examination, teach the curriculum, but the secondary schools take the credit for them, because the complementary schools cannot actually enter children for the exams. It's only the mainstream schools that can. So the mainstream schools get the credit for it, even though the complementary schools have done all of the teaching.
Okay, thank you. Someone in the audience would like you to tell us more about how these experiences are definitely necessary to help students be integrated into mainstream schools and society in general. However, it puzzles me, the person who asks the questions, how to face segregation. In other words, how to help mainstream students value migrants' cultures and diversity.
Yeah, I mean, it bothers me as well. I think so segregation, well, it's obviously problematic. There are many arguments for inclusion of minority languages in majority settings, but it's such a struggle. I don't know, there's so many things I want to say about this. I've got to kind of sort it out. It's such a struggle in UK settings to include any languages. I mean, as I say, Spanish is the most popular, but I mean, Britain is even worse than the United States in terms of getting any language on the curriculum. So it's deeply problematic. Complementary schools themselves, in terms of inclusion and segregation, it's very complicated for them, because in some ways, many would argue that keeping themselves separate from the mainstream gives them freedom to follow a curriculum and a pedagogy which is outside of the kind of monolingualizing of British mainstream education. So it allows them to do something different. So you will hear both arguments for keeping themselves detached from mainstream education, but you will also hear arguments for better inclusion, more arguments around multilingualism in British education. So I think the arguments kind of go both ways. It used to be that there were more minority languages taught in British mainstream settings. I think that is falling away all the time. So it's a kind of constant battle.
We have one more question related to the use of translation and translanguaging in Colombia. Your presentation shows how the use of the 3 T's supports students' engagement and proficiency. In many of our classroom, translation from English to Spanish is a popular teaching resource. Sometimes we are skeptical about the emphasis, as teachers may recur to the use of grammar translation method. What would be your recommendation for the use of translation as a skill in language learning?
Well, I think it goes back to the first question that was asked, that, what kind of training do teachers have? I think it has to be part of teacher training, a kind of translanguaging as pedagogy or code switching as pedagogy. It has to be part of our university curriculum, really, so that it doesn't feel ad hoc. We get rid of the guilt that is associated with translanguaging pedagogy, and many others have made this argument, and I think those 2 quotes that I used in the beginning, these arguments have been made in Colombia for many years, and also I think it has to be, as I guess my paper has tried to argue, that these responses or solutions have to be local. They have to kind of be a bottom-up response to context that the teachers know well, that the teacher educators know well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chris. We are just on time to continue with our next presentation. Thank you very much again. And if you have any other questions, you can write them in the chat. The audience can write them in the chat. We have some problems with the chat in YouTube, but we're working to fix them. So Janet, should I continue with the introduction of the next presentation?
Yes, please, Diana. Thank you.
Okay. So our next presenters are Professor Janet Ortiz Medina from the University of Antioquia. She is a professor and researcher at the School of Languages, University of Antioquia, and currently the coordinator of the master's program in foreign language teaching and learning. She holds a master's degree from the same program, and her research interests include critical literacies, critical interculturality, and peace education in relation to foreign language teaching and learning and teaching education. Also, we will have Dr. Jaime Uzma presenting. He holds a PhD in education and is a teacher, educator, and researcher at the School of Languages at the University of Antioquia. He combines his research on the social, economic, and political implications of language education policies with an active participation in language policy and professional development initiatives at the institutional, local, and national level. So thank you for being here, and you can start now.
Thank you very much, Diana. So I'm going to share my screen. Just to add something to Diana's introduction of our presentation, we are presenting on behalf of our research team, and Professor Mauri Aguirre will join us as well to tell us about part of this project. Jaime, you may start.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I have 3 minutes to do my part. So thank you everyone for being here. Angela, great presentation. Thank you very much, and it's very nice to see you again. Elana, your presentation was great yesterday, and thank you the committee for organizing the program. Diana, Adriana, Janet, all of you. Good job. So and thank you, Jose Aldemar, Norvegia, for being here with us too, and all the other colleagues. It's very nice to be here talking about these issues. So our project is called, our presentation is called Lenguajes para la Permanencia, una propuesta desde la interculturalidad crítica. Go ahead, Janet. And we are going to present what we are doing right now, but it's part of a bigger research agenda. Just to mention some of the people who are working with us right now in the project: Jason, Manuela, Paula, Maure, Fabio, Claudia, Jenny, Diana, Janet, and myself. All of us are part of two research groups, Kiae and Eale, and we are connected to the Foreign Language Teacher Education Program and the Master's Program in the School of Languages. Basically, we're going to talk about the context of our project, and then a quick view of critical interculturality, and then we will move into the current projects we are doing and the agenda for the next years. Go ahead, Janet. So just to give you a little bit of a context, these initiatives started some years ago, like about 5 years ago, in the context of the internationalization of higher education and how this agenda came to Universidad Antioquia. And we had a new institutional foreign language educational policy agreement in 2014, which basically introduced a mandatory group of courses in English, which were basically 5 levels of English for all the undergraduate programs and students in the university, mandatory for all students, and positioning English as a language of prestige and power in the academia and higher education, and also basically kind of promoting this instrumental view of languages. So we started a series of research projects, which basically we started in 2016, with socio-linguistic diagnosis, and then of the indigenous students in the university. And then we started a big conversation in different universities all around Colombia and with different schools inside the university. And we finished that project, and in 2018 we started another project, which was basically an implementation of actions based on the previous one. And then we moved in the third project was a project we started with Professor Angela Chris, which basically it's leading us to the construction of a national network on these issues. And currently, the project that we have, Lenguajes para la Permanencia, which is basically the project that Janet and Maure will talk about. If we talk about the first project, basically just to tell you that the big umbrella that we have conceptually is this decolonial theories and a critical view of interculturality, which basically recognizes that there are multiple ways of understanding culture, understanding languages, and understanding ethnicity, understanding knowledge, what is truth, etc. And that basically we need to recognize local knowledge and Latin American perspectives in front of mostly hegemonic, how do you say? Hegemonic views of language and culture that are basically more coming from the north, whatever that means. Like there are norths in the south and south in the north. We are talking about Anglo-Saxon, Europe-based, mostly European views of language, culture, and teaching, learning, etc. Go ahead, Janet.
Jaime, just one thing to add here that is very important for then tell you about the implementation of the project is its intercultural dialogue at the center of building critical interculturality, because with the cultural dialogue, we need to start analyzing the unequal relationships between the individuals that are interacting in dialogue, validating their languages and strengthening their identities. And those have been like the leading principles of this project in all of the spaces that we have worked.
Yeah, there are some publications we have so far. So for those of you who are interested in going deeper into these concepts and what we are doing so far, you're welcome to just let us know. We will share those publications with you. So the first study that we did is what I told you about is the sociolinguistic diagnosis in 2006, 2017 on the indigenous students at the university. We found that we have more than 3,000 students coming from ethnic communities in the university, and they are distributed like 25% indigenous, 41% mulattoes, 33% Afro, and 1% Romani. And many of them speak different languages. We have 18 different pueblos, indigenous pueblos in the university, and 22 languages that are spoken. A big finding is that 84% of them, of the indigenous students in the university, 84% of them speak in Spanish as their first language. But we also found, go ahead, Janet. But we also found that there is a positive perception about English, and they say, yeah, if English is mandatory for all, it should be mandatory for us too, because we don't want to be taken as people who cannot learn other languages. In fact, many of us already speak 2 or 3 languages. But there is a negative perception, 18% have a negative perception of English in terms of how it has been positioned as a language of power, but also there is a lot of resistance in terms of how it has been taught to them previously, and from what perspective, kind of positioning some cultures on top of some other cultures, or some languages on top of some other language. So based on these studies, based on this initial study, we decided that we needed to do some other studies, and that were more kind of implemented in different actions in terms of how the students are accessing English, how an intercultural approach to language teaching, English teaching in Colombia was needed, and also how teachers should know more about this diversity and recognize diversity in Colombia, and also explore different approaches to English teaching in Colombia, in such a diverse country like Colombia. And this is basically what we are going to talk now.
Okay, so we started with this project, with a pilot project concerning like an intervention, as Jaime just mentioned, with a group of English teachers from the institutional English program at the University of Antioquia, and a group of ethnic community students. We did a pilot project, and from what we learned in that project, trying to respond to those views and challenges and needs of students coming from ethnic communities, and especially indigenous students at the university, we started this third project, trying to reach more professors at the university, not only teaching English, but teaching other languages, also trying to reach more students that are beginning their process of learning English at the university, and to trying to get to have a greater impact on the programs at the School of Languages. So we planned this project and set out the purpose to explore with this group of students and foreign language teachers at the university, the ways in which a critical intercultural approach to language teaching centered on the recognition and validation of ethnic, epistemic, cultural, and linguistic diversity can favor foreign language learning, strengthening learners' identities, and contribute to the permanence of students coming from ethnic communities. The project had 2 components. The first component with students, we offered them an English course called Aprender Inglés en la Universidad. This was targeting, as I mentioned it, students, first semester students coming from ethnic communities at the university. And also we offered them an ongoing support component to help them with everything they needed to get familiar with the university life, with responding to academic demands. So we also did this part of integral support. And with the foreign language teachers at the School of Languages, we offered them a professional development course called Enseñar Inglés en la Universidad, una mirada desde la interculturalidad. So I'm going to invite Professor Maure Aguirre. She was in charge of the component with students, the course and the integral support to students. She's gonna tell us a little bit, like she's gonna give us a glance at what they did in this course, and then I'm gonna tell you about the component with foreign language professors. Carlos, ¿le puedes activar cámara y micrófono a la profesora Maure Aguirre? Por favor.
Claro que sí, profesora, pero no me aparece con el nombre de Maure Aguirre.
Programa de desarrollo profesional.
Programa
Vale.
de desarrollo profesional. Gracias, Jaime.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Maure, we can hear you well.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Well, Aprender Inglés en la Universidad was a course that we offer, as Janet said, to students for first semester. They were all taking the first course in PIFLE, the Institutional English Program. And this course lasted 40 hours. We had 30 hours for synchronous sessions. We met once a week on Wednesdays or Fridays because we had two different groups. And then the additional 10 hours, we asked students to work in an asynchronous manner, and we guided their work. These 40 hours included not only the sessions in which we explored different content and topics in English, and we had discussions, we worked on different writing exercises, but also we had space for supporting students at different levels. As you can see on screen, we had two big themes or units. We call them units, and the units were guided through questions. These questions came from the previous experience that we had with the project that Janet mentioned before, but also were questions that we shared with students. We analyzed the questions with them, and we came up to the conclusion that these were the questions that were going to guide the two units. Through these questions, we not only explored different topics related to identity, community, where they came from, their origins, their languages, but also how the university had become their community as well, and how they perceived diversity, not only in their local communities, but also in the community of the University of Antioquia. Through this course, we wanted to promote intercultural dialogue, and that's why all the languages that students had were very important in the discussions that we had in the class. So Spanish, English were used when they felt more comfortable using any of those languages, and also some of them had experience learning their indigenous languages, and when it was possible for them, because not all of them had that resource, they brought those languages as well. We wanted to promote critical reflection, so that's why the questions that you see in the big units intend to do that. And we, one of the objectives was to strengthen all identities, not only students' identities, but as a community, as a group of Aprender Inglés en la Universidad, we wanted to strengthen our identities as well. Through the process, we created different kind of texts. We had the opportunity to work with multimodal texts, with identity texts, as you would see in a moment that I'll share with you some examples. The conversations that we had in class refer to those topics, and of course we had a process in which students are starting from seeing a model, seeing a test, analyzing the text, working on grammar and linguistic elements, practicing those elements, then participating in discussions, having simple questions related to the text or the video or the audio that we had worked on, and then moving towards a more personal experience and trying to share that experience through English and sometimes through Spanish, but with the help of the other students and my help, in this case that I was leading the class, we tried to do that in English as well. So you would see, I'm gonna start sharing with you an example of what we did. With the group, we decided to create an online magazine. I hope you're seeing my screen. this was one of the magazines that the students created. The first thing that you're seeing, it's the cover of the magazine. It was a collage of pictures. We decided to bring pictures that represented them, that represented their communities, what they liked, what they felt identified with. So as you can see, we have food, we have people dancing, we have landscapes, etc. So in the magazine, they wrote letters to the editor explaining what they wanted to share. And basically, it was the exploration of knowing themselves and knowing others through different languages, not only the way we write, the way we speak, but also through pictures, through music, through arts, to sharing who they are. So as you can see, one of the activities that we did was an identity wheel, and what you're seeing here is one of the students' product. They did it at the beginning of the course, and then at the end, they went back to that activity, they improved it. So it was also like a writing exercise that took the entire course to have it complete. We can share the links later on with you of the magazine so that you continue exploring. I just wanted to show you some of the, I wanted to show you a video of one of the students explaining the name of the magazine. As you can see here at the top, this is a magazine that included words in indigenous languages and words in English. And they were the ones who decided the name. And I'm gonna share with you the reasoning of that name.
Vision to mankind is the transformation of human being thanks to knowledge and thanks to its construction. Christian is a word from indigenous language and Belachami that means knowledge. And Runankai is a word from Quechua that means transformation of being. So Christian through Runankai, it is the knowledge that we can acquire as a result of our hard work and dedication.
Okay, I just wanted to share that with you because the title of each magazine tried to cover everything they wanted to share in their work, right? We had two groups, as I said, which means we also have two magazines. We don't probably have time to show it all, but just for you to know that students created this throughout the entire process. With collaborative writing, individual work, support from the teacher, support in the acompañamientos integral sessions that we had in which students got support at academic, social, personal levels. So it was a construction throughout the process. And also it was the way that they found to show to other classmates, people that were also studying the process, that they could get familiar with English, and at the same time, as they say here in the letter to the reader, they wanted to show that aprender inglés en la universidad allowed them to learn through knowing others. And that was something that they highlighted from the process. And I would like to share a quote that one of the students said, and she said, in aprender inglés en la universidad, yo puedo ser, which means I can be myself here. I can be myself. I have a place here, and I can develop myself through this course. So Janet, I think I took more time. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem, Mauri. Thank you very much. So I'm quickly going to...
Annie,
yes.
I'm being told that we have only 4 minutes.
Yes, okay, no problem. So very quickly, I'm gonna tell you about, I don't know why this is not, okay. About the teachers component. We had, in this case, 17 teachers of different programs at the School of Languages, from the English Institutional Program from multilingual, and from the Foreign Language Teaching Program. So we had teachers of Portuguese, English, and French in this course. We also worked with 20 hours of synchronous work and 20 hours of independent work, looking at interculturality. We did explore concepts like culture, interculturality, different proposals of interculturality in Europe, but we emphasized on critical interculturality from the Latin American perspective. And in class, we basically had spaces for conversation and reflection on how they made sense of those things that we were exploring and how they could put those concepts into their own lenses and words. And I'm going to show you just some quick examples of things that that teachers did during the course. For example, expanding their views of diversity, not only associating diversity with my students. I don't have, my students are not very different because they all speak Spanish or because they all live in this area. And they expanded like through the exercises we did, through the conversations they had with other teachers, to see that there is a lot of diversity in their classes that involve students' different identities, their differences in terms of the places they come from, the languages they speak, their educational background, their cultural heritage, etc. So they were more aware of like all the whole concept of diversity that they can see in their classes and also in our context. They were very critical about that need to acknowledge our own identities, to be able to approach other cultures and the learning and teaching of other cultures and languages. They also had like very, I would say, profound reflections on different circulating discourses, dominant discourses in foreign language teaching, like dealing with the image of, or the representations of native speakers, the materials and methodologies that we tend to copy from center-based knowledge communities, the language varieties that are privileged in foreign language classes, and like alternatives to that. So there was a lot of discussion on those aspects that they saw as problematic during the discussions, and they were able to put into words how they understood these views of interculturality from their own lenses, how it related to their own system of beliefs, and envisioned like changes that they could make in their practices. Very importantly, they asked questions all of the time that we didn't have answers with, but that they try to also like answer in collaborative work with their peers during the course. For example, how can I, like if I don't value who I am and where I come from, how can I approach the learning and the teaching of other cultures and other languages? Like that relevance and that importance of recognizing my own and valuing my own identity as a teacher and in my learners as well. How can I put all of these into practice, these views of interculturality, culture, intercultural dialogue, when I have a prescribed syllabus in my program? What can I do? And actually they did suggest alternative ways in the project. Those were like some of the questions. How can I validate the identities of my students that come from many places around Colombia at the same time that they get familiar with a foreign language? And those were some of the questions, and these are just some of the things they did in the final project. I took like just some shots of what they did. They planned a whole unit trying to integrate an intercultural view of that unit and plan a specific lesson within that unit. That's what we got to do. And in the planning, we saw that they gave prominence to students' voices, creating identity texts that reflected the places they came from, how they feel at the university, their dreams, etc. Also, there was a lot about problematizing conventional materials that they use in teaching and asking questions, critical questions, before using those materials, and also planning questions to work with students on unveiling hidden messages in those materials and unveil those representations of speakers of other languages and of languages themselves, and of speakers, of language speakers in our own context, etc. So those were some examples of what teachers could do, and Jaime is gonna tell you about what we're doing now, and that would be all. Jaime.
No, just to, because we don't have more time, just our current agenda is basically connected to the creation of a national network with some universities, Universidad Antioquia, Universidad Valle, and Universidad Sucre, with resources that we got from Universidad Sterling and Professor Angela Chris and an international project we participated in. This national network will continue to support projects on these ideas of language diversity in higher education, connected to linguistic diversity, ethnicity, and different ways of understanding higher education. Mm-hmm. We are also creating a language course for all students at the university with this approach, Aprender Inglés en la Universidad, which is an approach that we are kind of promoting through, like, in terms of English, so that when people come into the university perceive that there are other ways of getting access to English and getting closer to the language. We're also creating a web page, and we will be putting all the materials there. The materials we created from this project will be put there. The web page will be available like in a month, less than a month. The creation of teaching and learning materials, this is part of the agenda too, and all of that will be put in the web page, which is being created with the resources that I mentioned to you with this project with Angela Chris and other universities. Getting funding for future research projects. There is a call for research projects that is coming from the university, and we want to participate in that. Further analysis and writing, yes, we have a lot to do in terms of that, and also we want to have an impact in terms of language education policies and teacher education programs all around Colombia, and that's why we are working with other universities. That's it, I think, and thank you for being here with us. If you want to know more about these projects, just feel free to send us a message and we will be available.
Thank you, Jaime, Janet, and Maure, for sharing the results and the work that you have been doing with this research. We just have 2 minutes left for the questions, and we have more than one question, but I will only ask one, and the rest we will leave it for the end of the event for the conversation. One of the significant challenges in the language education of minority students is to find an adequate balance between the presence of English and other languages in their academic and personal domains. In many cases, some people have openly considered displacing English as it may be a language of domination and imperialism. What are your insights about how to give English and minority languages an adequate place for minority students language education? I'm going to write the question in the chat because it's a long one.
Well,
it was clear, Diana.
Thank you, Diana. That's a very complex question. I just have to say that that's a huge challenge, that learning any other language, be it English or another language, it's always an opportunity to see other ways to make meaning of the world. And what we tried or have tried to do through the exploration of an intercultural approach is precisely trying to balance that work and that relation between English and the languages of our students, and how we can find that balance so that those languages also have a say in the classroom, and the cultures of students and identities of students also have a say in the English classroom. And that's why Maure talked about Spanish and indigenous languages from students participating in the course having a place in the class. Not forbidding students, for example, to speak in Spanish, like when they feel like using their own languages. So it's more about, as Professor Angela Chris and as Professor Elana Shohami and other presenters mentioned it yesterday, opening spaces in those language learning classrooms for students to use all of their linguistic resources, being more open and including and validating all of those resources that students bring into the classroom. And we need to start by getting to know about our students and the languages they speak and what in the diversity we have there.
Yeah, we can expand the answer in the panel just to tell you that we are for languages in general. We don't like to position some languages on top of others, etc., or to say now that English is terrible and people shouldn't be learning English. We don't want that. We just want to the promotion of languages that are connected to diversity in Colombia. That's what we want, and we are going for that agenda. Right now, we are working with the deaf community in the university, working with the creation of a sign language course for all the students in the university. So we are for languages. That's basically.
Okay, thank you, Jaime, Janet, and Mauri again. Now we will have Dr. Adriana Gonzalez introducing Dr. Norbella Miranda with her presentation, Who are the Indigenous undergraduate students at the Universidad del Valle? Some advances in the construction of sociolinguistic and academic profile.
Okay, good morning again, and it's a pleasure to have you all here, and we thank you for being faithful to the presentation and to this interesting event. We know it's been a long time, but the discussion will be very, very beneficial to all of us. So it is my pleasure to introduce two colleagues from Universidad del Valle, Professor Norbella Miranda and Professor Jose Aldemar Alvarez Valencia, who are both world known and locally known for their research in language policies, multilingualism, teacher education, and teacher professional development. Professor Norbella Miranda, she holds a PhD in education, and she conducts research in various areas such as language policy, planning, multilingualism, and EFL curriculum. She has carried various projects nationally and internationally, and she has explored the teaching of English and other languages in schools in Cali. She also has extensive publications in national and international journals. And we also have the honor to have Professor Jose Aldemar Alvarez, who holds a PhD from the University of Arizona. And he's at the School of Languages at Universidad del Valle as a professor. And he's the chair of the major in English language teaching in the institutional doctoral program at Universidad del Valle. His research interests include critical intercultural education, decolonial theories, multimodal communication, and multilingualism. So let's welcome our two dear colleagues and friends. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for that kind introduction. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly well.
Right, okay. All right, so, good morning, and thank you for this invitation. Thank you for attending this talk to the audience. Our gratitude to the organizers, Janet and her team, for inviting us to share the work that we are conducting at Universidad del Valle. So the title of our talk, as you can see, is Who are the Indigenous undergraduate students at Universidad del Valle? Some advances in the construction of a sociolinguistic and academic profile. We are Norbella Miranda, my colleague, and myself, Jose Aldemar, as you just said, but I would like to also say that we're here on behalf of our colleagues, Luis Emilio Mora and Andres Valencia, and also our indigenous students who have worked with us to conduct this study, as you can see, from different indigenous communities. Today our purpose is to present some initial results of the study we're conducting, and this is what we'd like to cover today. We'd like to go over an introduction to kind of like one core concept of this research, then some of the theoretical foundations and the structure of the project, methods, and some findings. I'd like to start with this short narrative of Manuel Usa. He is an indigenous student of Pueblo Misak. So he is describing how he sees his community sees language. And this is what he says. There are three dynamics to understand language. The first is called Namric. It comes from the mouth, from the voice, from person to person, and it has its grammar and everything else. and it allows understanding between us. And then there is Namui Wam. Namui, our, Wam, voice. It means the voices of our territory, and it is the language that I can understand, such as the chirp of the little birds, let's say, shh, the voice of the wind, the voice of flames when they indicate something, and the voice of dreams. And there is another form of communication that is the Kamba one. Kamba, that means ancestral. One, voice, the voice of our ancestral spirits. They have showed us the world and nature, and this is why we find figures in the stones that our elder spirits left and allowed us to understand the world as we know it. So, and this is just one example of how different our cosmogonies are. While we have a very reductive, monolithic, and verbocentric view of language, we have indigenous students in our classrooms that have such a complex and multidimensional view of language, you know? So, and then I wonder how these cosmogonies clash or encounter when they meet in the classroom.
Such as the one from Manuel, make us reflect and also have a look at our practices. And they also invite us to find out more about language and culture. In our case as researchers, we had the honor to talk to Dr. Uzma back in 2018 when he taught a class in our doctoral program in education. So we started this conversation about the colonial theories, and he also shared with us the project that we just heard from him and from Adriana. Before we move to the conceptual foundations, I just wanted to tell you that in the university, we have at this point like an appropriate context to study diversity and to study different cultures, since we have any Office of Ethnic Affairs, and there's also an ongoing conversation about curriculum reform. We have also some programs that plan to help students with academic success, such as ACES and GRACA. And also what the literature has shown is that, as you know, indigenous students have been at a disadvantage in higher education, and they have also been discriminated. So as for the conceptual framework, yes, so our project is framed within the social, relatively new social term, which has expanded the conversation into interculturality and multilingualism and also ethnicity. We also draw on a critical perspective. Jose, please, next. Okay, critical and decolonial perspective, in which we want to balance the power and we want to recognize the voices of our students. Also, we frame our work within the critical interculturality perspective, in which we want to resist those forms of coloniality that exist. And finally, we have also an ecological perspective towards language and towards language policy, which kind of guide us to find ways for more linguistic and social equity. So we decided to work on a macro project, which we divided into 3 stages. This is the objective of the macro project. So we want to design and implement programs and strategies to improve retention and graduation rates of indigenous students at our university. So we have, as I said, 3 stages. The first one is the one we are working on now, which is the description of sociolinguistic and academic profile of our indigenous students. And then on stage 3, we will move to the identification of those academic challenges that students face, and we'll also design a proposal for retention and graduation rates. And finally, in stage 3, we want to implement and evaluate those strategies.
So the study that we're conducting now is focuses on the first stage of the project. which we intend to construct. I'm sorry, here. Okay, we intend to construct a sociolinguistic and academic profile of Indigenous students. And so we have posed several questions. So, for example, what are the Indigenous students at Universidad del Valle? What is their family, social, and geographic background? We're wondering about the languages they speak. You know, how they relate to Spanish. What about the foreign languages that the university offers, and the attitudes they have towards languages. As far as the academic profile, we want to know about the academic characteristics of Indigenous students, how that relates to performance, and even how they perceive performance. And also the relationship between the sociolinguistic profile and Indigenous students' academic profile. So our research design is informed by a mixed methods approach. We will collect data primarily from a sociolinguistic survey, documentary information about policy, and audiovisual materials from academic and cultural events of the community. We are actually conducting in-depth interviews and círculos de palabra, which is or talking circles, which is an ancestral practice of Indigenous communities where they gather around in a circle to palabrear. They use the word palabrear, something like languaging about, you know, a specific topic. We're also drawing on our ethnographic field notes. Our participants are 123 students, so that's around the 10% of the Indigenous student of the population of the university. And so let's look at some initial findings.
Okay, so some of the results that we're going to be presenting today come from the databases from the registrar's office and also from the sociolinguistic interview. So first, we learned from the databases that from 2010 to 2020, in the last decade, we have had 1,176 Indigenous students, and from them, most of them are male, they are men. So we have 52%. In terms of their regional origin, as we expected, our students at Univalle come from the southwest of the country. So you can see here at the bottom that most of our students come from Nariño. So we have 510 students from Nariño. We have also 403 students coming from El Cauca. And also our students, of course, they come from Valle del Cauca, no? And we also have some students from the Amazon region, Caldas, and Tolima. In terms of Indigenous pueblos, which they belong to, so we learned that most of our students are pastos, based in Nariño. So they are pastos. Then we have students that are NASA, so we have 34 students that are NASA. We have also Yanaconas, and we have Misak students from El Cauca too. And we have also students from other towns.
Microphone. Okay, so the second area of interest for us is ethnic identity. And so how do students recognize themselves given their different trajectories, as coming from or not from Indigenous territories, or speaking or not their ancestral languages? Also, the impact of the university experience on their identity. We'll see that. We chose some data points to share with you. So here's a question about identity affiliation. We asked which of the following statements about identity affiliation best describes students. And we see that most participants, 97, marked the option I am Indigenous, and I identify myself as Indigenous. And so from here, we can also highlight that the statements represented by colors yellow and green, I always lose my pointer, indicate that the university, you see there, the university is a space where students have begun to recognize themselves as Indigenous. I lived in an Indigenous territory. I arrived at University del Valle, and I recognize myself as an Indigenous. So Well, you see, in many cases, when they live in their territories, the ethnic category is not a marker. You know, it is only when they arrive on campus that it becomes a differential marker. We also found here that six students who grew up in an indigenous community for some reason do not consider themselves indigenous. Well, what about languages? Sorry. So we initially thought that many students were bilingual, but the survey shows that only 8%, as you see here, 8%, that is 12 students, speak their ancestral languages. You know, this tells a lot about language loss in the communities. As far as the different languages, the most common languages spoken by participants are Nasa-Yuve, you see here 42%, and we have that's from Pueblo Nasa, Nambric of Pueblo Misak, Abeki Pinao of Pueblo Pijao, Quechua. And so something interesting here is the case of Los Pastos from Nariño. From the linguistic point of view, this language, Lengua de los Pastos, is considered an extinct language. However, when you talk with indigenous students from there, they say that their language still exists. You know, that they say that it still exists in the community, in the lexicon of the community, in the objects and the places, and so they are looking for initiatives to revitalize the language. Now, this is actually what you see on screen is a very interesting result, you know, indigenous interests in learning languages. And we asked students if they would like to learn the indigenous languages of their communities, you know, that they did not learn during their upbringing at the university, you know, learn languages at the university, and 80% replied positively. So it's interesting to see that they see the university as a space for revitalization, reivindication, and recognition of their languages. And then we have this, yes?
I'm sorry, Aldemar, I just have to remind you that you have 5 minutes and then get 10 minutes for questions.
Great, thank you. So in here, this is also something that you will see that resonates with what Janet and Jaime presented today about indigenous students' interest in learning English. So we asked students if they would like to learn the, if they would like to learn other languages about English. And, you know, like one of the comments we usually hear from many students is that English can become a roadblock for their graduation since it is a requirement. And they also feel that a disadvantage because when they start university, their English level is usually lower than their peers. So we ask students about their interest in learning English and other languages. And as you can see, 67% say they would like to learn English. And they also, you know, talk about other languages like Colombian Sign Language and French. Norbella?
Yes, we will refer now to our second question, which is the academic profile of our students. So first, we wanted to know, like, the admission, how many students we have and how this has increased. So we could notice an increase from the year 2010 to 2018, as you can see here. So in 2010, we had only 101 students, and 3 years ago, we had 195 students. So we have seen an increase. However, the number of applications, as you can see here in the orange line, has tripled. So in 2010, there were only 254 students that applied to study at Univalle, but in 2018, there were 682 students. So what this is telling us is that perhaps students are getting more information about the university, how to get to start university, but it also telling us that we need to open more spaces, more places for students
to study in our institution. We learned also that most of our students are enrolled in the engineering school. So as you can see here, like almost 32% of the students are in engineering programs. However, when we looked closer to the data, we learned that most of the students prefer they study chemistry, geography, history, and social work, which are part of the exact sciences and humanities schools. So this seems to be like contradictory, but the thing is that in the School of Engineering, we have 18 programs as opposed to, for example, humanities, where we have only 12. So that explains the difference. And something that I want to add, that's something that we are trying to find out more with students is why they select these programs. Like, we want to know if they think not only in what they like, but also in the needs of their communities. In terms of their GPA, their academic performance, so we found that the average was in the last decade has been 3.47, which in general is considered fair. And you can see in the graph here that also women are getting higher grades than men. Remember that when we presented the socio-demographic information, we know that there are more men than women, but we see here that women have like better grades, especially in the schools of arts, as you can see here in the second group of bars, and also in the School of Psychology. So we also wanted to have the students' perceptions about how we could, as a university, contribute to student retention. And we found, or we gave like 16 different possibilities, and also a open question. So we found that what students want to have is economic help. Like, economic factors have a big impact in their student retention, followed by academic factors and social factors. So in terms of economic factors, so they want to have free lunch. They also say they need total or partial scholarships. And of course, they need help with educational materials. Now they want to buy like photocopies and books and all that. They also asked for assistantships. And within academic factors, they express that they want tutors that help them, but with exclusive dedication to support them. So programs like Access, for example, or GRACA that I mentioned at the beginning will have like to adjust, or we will have to provide new strategies to help them. They also want to be informed about opportunities for academic exchange. And finally, it was really interesting to find that they think that strengthening the Indigenous Council would also help them to stay at the university. This is showing like the role of the Indigenous Council, el Consejo Universitario, Indígena Universitario, and that also supports our decision to continue working with them during the second and the third stages of the project. Jose.
Mike. All right, so here are some conclusions. Since we don't have much time, I'm just gonna read them. And so we found that during the last decade, there has been an increase in enrollment of Indigenous students, and they bring along all the unique cultural and linguistic resources that need to be sustained and made more visible to the academic community on campus and outside. For some Indigenous students, the university is instrumental for the recognition of their Indigenous identity, as promoting languages, promoting cosmogonies, recognizing them. Indigenous students' advocacy for their revitalization of their languages needs to be translated into initiatives of our institution. So we also have to do that. Indigenous students' interest in learning local and foreign languages represents a possibility to further the recognition and promotion of plurilingualism, but also interculturality. And I think we have to work harder to increase student retention, but we have to consider not only their academic actions, you know, integrating their cosmogonies and languages and so on, but we also have to do that from the material perspective. That means addressing economic factors on campus. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Gracias.
Okay, thank you, Norveja and Jose Lumar, for this presentation. We invite the audience to send us your questions through this chat or through YouTube. And I have received already a couple of questions. We have 7 minutes to try to cover them before the break. So let me address one. This person says that although Indigenous students may have differences in their multilingualism experiences, some universities stress learning English and other major Western languages, which is very evident in some of the presentations. What does your study show about the use of Spanish in academic settings for these students?
Norveja, do I go?
Yes, I'd like to express that some of the students have said that they might need some help with Spanish, like they want to continue studying Spanish at the university. And in fact, there is a program called GRACA, los grupos de apoyo para la cultura académica, where they can go and, I mean, to be supported with tutors and all that. But they need more, they say that they need more help with their Spanish. They often feel at a disadvantage. Sometimes they say that they don't quite understand much and they need to read like twice, I mean, a lot of times the documents and the books that they need to read. I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, well, actually, I had an interview this week with one of NASA student, and what she told me is that initially it was really hard for her because they come from the community. She's bilingual, and then she said, we speak Spanish, but it's more like the colloquial Spanish, and then we come here and then we have academic Spanish. And she said it's like this curve at the initially was really hard for me, but now like after halfway through my program, I was able to understand better and read better and so on. So it seems like at the beginning of the program, they have a hard time, but then it kind of like balances.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to both of you for that answer. And I have an additional question. I remind the audience that at the end, we have a break and then another presentation. We will have a final conversation with today's presenter. So there will be also an opportunity to ask the questions or address some questions to all of them. So this person would like to know if Universidad del Valle has the opportunity for minority students to learn their own indigenous languages, and if they support them in the learning, and if there is an opportunity through this learning to strengthen their cultural identities.
Yes, the university offers NASAYUVE. They have NASAYUVE 1 and 2, and they have other courses. For example, they have one that is called Jurisdicción Indígena, and they also want another one that is something related to epistemologías indígenas, indigenous epistemologies. They have at least 4 or 5 courses that are taught by indigenous students or people who have been working with indigenous communities. So the university is doing that, but I also like to say that sometimes it is the communities who might not want their language to be taught, because remember that this is about resisting, and kind of like giving up your language is a way of being colonized. So we have also heard those ideas that providing access to the language is a way of being colonized. No, I don't know if Norveja wants to add anything else.
No, basically that's the information. There is also a project to teach Namrik, which we hope we can do fast, I mean, in the next future.
Okay, and we have one final question in the chat. Do the students change their attitudes towards their home languages as they see that these languages have less power at the university? And how do they do the tests? In which language?
Go ahead, Norm.
Yes, okay. So something that we have been identifying first in the survey, in the sociodemographic and economy survey, is that the attitudes towards their own language is like kind of mixed. Like they think that as part of their identity and they like those languages and they want to continue learning them, but at the same time, they feel that they are at a disadvantage, so that they have a lower position, lower status compared to Spanish or English. So yes, they feel that the languages have less power, but it doesn't necessarily relate directly to the university, but it comes from also their communities. So even in their families. So how do they do the test? In which language? Well, Spanish is used in the university, so all the exams are taken in Spanish, right? And of course in English, in the courses of English, they take the exams in English. I don't know if you want to add something, Jose.
No, you know what? I was thinking maybe we can discuss this later, but this is really complex. I was thinking of Lewis Gordon. This is a philosopher who works on coloniality, and I'm gonna read this. It says, Euromodernity produced a special form of alienation through the transformation of whole groups of people into categories of indigenous, native, enslaved, colonized, and Black. Such people suffer from a unique form of melancholy or bereavement from separation, as they are indigenous to a world that rejects them by virtue of making them into problems. And when you think of them and you hear them talk about languages, they always have this melancholy, you know, it's kind of like something that I lost. And even like the pastos, that language is linguistically extinct and it's really hard to revitalize, but they still think it's there, it's alive. And it's very complex when you talk about languages, because for many language is identity, but some of them don't have a language, so they have to hinge to other elements of their identity to feel like complete, while other groups look at them as incomplete because they don't have a language. So it's really complex, the dynamics between the different indigenous communities.
Okay, thank you to both of you, and thank you to the audience for remaining faithful in this interesting conversation. I want to also thank all the presenters in the morning that have been taking part in this interesting conversation, and I invite you to have a 15-minute break and remind you to have questions on both chats for the final discussion. Thank you for staying with us.
Thank you.
Good job.
Let me stop sharing screen. How do I? Okay, great.
Chicos, muchas gracias. Muy interesante.
Gracias, Adri. Uy, se me ha descargado.
Muchísimas gracias, José Aldemar y Norbella.
A los chicos, Carlos, que nos están ayudando, ya tenemos el descanso de 15 minutos.
Adriana, no les dije, antes volvemos a las 10:20 porque ya son las 10:05.
Sí.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Todavía.
Ok, voy a tomarme algo porque sí tengo hambre.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being again here in the second and last part of our research symposium, Plurilingualism in Language Education. We will have now the last presentation of the morning before our conversation session with all presenters today. We're going to continue now with the presentation by Dr. Germana Carolina Soler Millán and Dr. Guillaume Rouch from Universidad de Caldas. The presentation is entitled The Ethnic Groups and Their Relationship with the Languages and Culture Within the Colombian Territory. I'm going to introduce our presenters. Dr. Germana Carolina Soler is currently the director of the Modern Languages program at the University of Caldas, where she also works as an associate professor of French as a foreign language education. Dr. Soler holds a PhD in language sciences from the University of Montpellier, and her research interests include sociolinguistics and intercultural mediations between native communities and foreign languages. And we'll also be hearing Dr. Guillaume Roux. He works as a professor of foreign language education at the Foreign Languages Department of the University of Caldas and leads the discourse analysis seminars in doctoral programs. Dr. Guillaume has a PhD in language sciences, and he's specialized in the relationship between language acquisition and learning. Moreover, he's an expert on the study of linguistic ideologies in native languages. Welcome, Professors Soler and Roux, and thank you for being here today, sharing your expertise and your work with us.
Janet, they're both saying that they cannot activate their microphones and cameras. So,
Carlos,
okay. Now,
okay.
Now it is working. Thank you, Professor Janet, for this kind presentation, for this kind introduction. I have to say that I'm very, very pleased to be here. I have to thank you for this amazing organization. And I have to say too that I'm very pleased to listen to all those interesting presentations of our colleagues. Thank you very much. Well, the research that we are presenting today is a work that we have begun doing with my colleague Guillaume Roux. And I have to say that we have begun doing this research like very recently. It's just the very beginning of we hope, a big work that we plan to do for some months. So I think today we're presenting just like the very preliminary part of this research. So the first part is my colleague Guillaume, who is presenting, and I will be back with some preliminary results.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Well, to begin, in Colombia, the issue of language can be problematic for ethnic groups. For some, Spanish has become the mother tongue, which contributes to the loss of native languages. In this case, a foreign language is treated like a second language. For others, the native language is maintained and Spanish is the second language and the foreign language is the third language. In both cases, either towards a disappearance of native languages or towards an additional effort to be made, ethnic groups are not subject to the same conditions as the rest of the population with regard to foreign languages. On the other hand, the example of the program of modern languages of the University of Caldas shows that students from ethnic groups experience the most difficulty in the program. Considering the multiple factors that can intervene in this situation, however, it is interesting to look at their relationship to language. Thus, in order to improve programs, methods, policies with a more inclusive goal, it is first and foremost fundamental to ask what relationship members of ethnic groups have with languages and what impact this relationship may have on their learning. Colombia officially recognized its linguistic and cultural diversity in the 1991 Constitution and has a number of language policy and planning for the protection and revitalization of native languages. However, despite these policies, on the one hand, some authors, such as De Mejia, note that there is insufficient funding to support these policies and that these policies remain insufficiently implemented. On the other hand, the consequence is that native languages are still losing ground, especially among young people. These facts are often related to the ideological dimension that is found in language planning and policy concerning foreign languages, especially English. These policies convey a discriminatory imperialist ideology in which members of ethnic groups are in different social linguistic situations from the rest of the population. De Mejia highlights a folk bilingualism that concerns ethnic groups and an elite bilingualism that concerns, in reality, a very small proportion of the population. The issue of bilingualism is central in the sense of knowing which bilingualism we are talking about, whether it is really a bilingualism with regard to foreign languages or an ideological designation. In fact, the teaching of foreign languages finds itself in a difficult situation where the object of teaching is also one of the sources of discrimination for these communities. With the aim of improving language programs, teaching methods, and policies, the objective of this research is to go back to the roots by highlighting how members of ethnic groups relate to and represent languages. The hypothesis is thus made that the representations they have a direct impact on their learning. The methodology we have is a social linguistic survey based on interviews and a questionnaire. The objective is to include the largest number of members from ethnic groups throughout the country. The project presented begins with students from all fields of study at the University of Caldas and non-indigenous students from the same university. The questionnaires aim to have quantitative information about the data collected. The interviews aim to deepen the identification of representations through discourse analysis. A pre-survey was conducted in 2020, and to date, 14 students from indigenous communities have been surveyed. Also, 20 non-indigenous students have been surveyed, and currently, the Afro-descendants and foreign language teachers are being surveyed too. And I let my colleague explain the results.
Can I have the camera, or is not possible?
Carlos, podemos activar la cámara de la profesora Germana. I'm sorry.
Profe, ya tiene los derechos para hacerlo.
Okay.
I think I'm going to stop this and
okay. Now it's working.
I'm going to share the screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So in this part, we would like to present some of the preliminary findings that we have so far. We can see the origins of these students. We have 6 students from Nariño, 2 students from Quichía, Risaralda, 6 students from Rio Sucio. We have some students from Embera, Carambá, Escopetera, and Pirsa, Males, Panam, Cañamono, and Loma Prieta. These are the origins of the students we have worked with. Sorry. And about native languages, so we could know that 71% speak or know some elements of an indigenous language, and 13% speak it as a native language. We have 6 students who speak Embera, 4 students who speak Quechua. And we have 28% students who do not know any indigenous language. And we have 100% of non-indigenous people and their families know nothing of an indigenous language. We intended to know about their families too, their grandparents, their mother, father, and so nobody speak any native language. 85% have family members among the indigenous students who speak or know some elements of an indigenous language. We can see a decrease with new generations, of course, of these native languages. About representations in Spanish, it's very interesting to see that 85% of students, of indigenous students, prefer Spanish. And they say they prefer Spanish because it's the native language, because it's the language of the country, of the culture, it's a common language, it's the language of globalization. Or students learn Spanish from childhood when it is not their mother tongue. The students, non-indigenous students, they consider the Spanish as a beautiful language, culturally rich, plurality of cultures and traditions. It's very interesting with this part that we see that ideology of a monolingual country. Of course, we know it's not a monolingual country. About representations of indigenous languages, indigenous students think that indigenous languages are the language of ancestors, of the identity, of the culture, of the roots, and very meaningful, they consider that it's the language of the forgetting. For non-indigenous people, minority languages represent diversity, protection, culture, tradition, cultural heritage, and very meaningful to endangered languages. Here it's very important to see that among indigenous and non-indigenous people, native languages represent culture and diversity, which is very positive for a collective revitalization, but the representations also invoke forgetfulness or something from the past. 57% of students consider native languages to be useful professionally, and they think they are useful for people who don't speak Spanish in the workplace or in places such as hospitals. 60% of non-native speakers consider minority languages to be useful professionally. And they say to interact with indigenous communities for social and professional inclusion. Here again, we can see that the social professional use of indigenous language is particularly interesting on the possibilities of revitalization. Very meaningful, every indigenous student laments the disappearance of native languages. And they point out this disappearance as something inevitable. They are conscious about the role of the government, so they blame governments. They think there is an invasion of non-indigenous people, and this helps or this causes this disappearance, and they blame capitalism and globalization. All non-indigenous people regret the disappearance of these languages. This observation goes in the direction of a possible revitalization in a common cultural identity construction. Only 85% consider that indigenous languages should be learned by all Colombians. Here we can see like the difference between indigenous and non-indigenous students. In non-indigenous students, we have the totality. We have 100% of the students who believe that minority languages should be learned by all Colombians. And we have 85% of indigenous students who consider that indigenous languages should be learned by all Colombians. They say it is important to learn those languages, to value cultural difference, to understand better the other, to communicate better. And the non-indigenous languages consider that it's important because it's their heritage and culture, and for inclusion. So some of the ideas of these students of the program of modern languages to preserve native languages for indigenous students, they consider that more space is needed for representation, teaching and practice of those languages. For non-indigenous people, to preserve native languages, they must be taught as a second language. And they gave very interesting ideas, like they must be described linguistically, they must be given more space in the media. If non-native speakers speak them, it is easier to teach them and transmit them, therefore to preserve these languages. So what about representation of foreign languages? For indigenous students, foreign languages are important for, we can see some representation, international communication, for cultural and community richness, for the intellectual quality of bilingualism. But it's very interesting to see too that there are some students who think that it's necessary to stop giving so much importance to foreign languages in order to better value indigenous languages. So they consider that because of that importance that foreign languages have in Colombia, minority languages are suffering and are disappearing. For non-indigenous people, they consider that foreign languages open doors to globalization, to meet other cultures, for development, and so on and so forth. Here we have something very interesting too about the representation of foreign languages, and is that for indigenous students, foreign languages represent an obstacle to the preservation of indigenous languages. We have 57% of the students who think that. And they think that the teaching of foreign languages, especially English, is not done under the same condition as the teaching of indigenous languages. And they consider that a balance should be found.
Dr. Germana, I'm sorry to interrupt, just to let you know that you have around 4 minutes to finish. Thank you.
Thank you. 80% of non-indigenous people consider that foreign languages, especially English, they mention English, are an obstacle to the preservation and revitalization of minority languages. So it's the same thing for indigenous and non-indigenous students. Foreign languages are given more importance than native languages. That's what non-Indigenous students think. And something very interesting too is that they talk about the educational system. They consider that the Colombian educational system is very poor, and that's why these languages, minority languages, do not have the importance they should have. And something that we consider very important too is that they think English is the only language that has a real place and support in education in our country. They have some proposals, the students, some ideas for preserving and for giving some revitalization to these languages in the education system. 100% of Indigenous students, they talk about the necessity of an inclusive education. They talk about the use of Indigenous languages in foreign language courses. And for non-Indigenous people, they talk about an inclusive pedagogy. They talk about activities to discover native cultures, specific conversation clubs, using pedagogical material created by ethno-educators, games, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so to finish, in our project, we can see that native languages are in decline. Some Indigenous students are aware of discrimination in favor of English. The data collected is intended to clearly highlight the representations of members of ethnic groups regarding native languages, Spanish and foreign languages, especially English. And the objectives of our project are to use this data for pedagogy more able to consider native languages and cultures, but also to participate in their revitalization. To take the teaching of foreign languages out of this ideological and discriminating status. To allow members of any groups in difficulty with languages to better apprehend their learning with regard to their language and culture of origin. The students' ideas go in the direction of, first, a better equality between foreign and native language teaching. For example, if English is taught 2 hours per week in elementary school, then 2 hours should be devoted to teaching a native language. Second, it is interesting to use native languages in a foreign language course. And in this sense, if we consider Colombia as a single culture within which there is a lot of diversity, we must question the notion of intraculturality, to consider that every Colombian who does not come from a minority ethnic group must consider indigenous languages and cultures as part of his or her own culture in order to build a common project in a co-cultural approach. This includes, most of all, the teacher's work in the classroom, for example, promoting a unique and diverse Colombian culture. The project is still in its infancy. The first results are particularly interesting, but to be developed according to the established schedule. And also, we want, according to the students' ideas, we want to establish the relationship between the current intercultural models, such as critical interculturality of Catherine Walsh or inclusive interculturality of De Mejia, with former social-linguistic successful models of revitalization, such as Fishman's model or Niñol's model for Catalonia, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Soler and Dr. Rule, for that insightful presentation. Really interesting. We see lots of trends in the studies that you have presented from your university and Universidad del Valle and also Universidad de Antioquia. We have time for one question. I'm going to ask you one question that we have collected from the audience, and then will continue in the conversation with all of the researchers. There will be space to ask you more about your project. So I'm gonna read the question for you. It says, your data show that formal education may contribute to enforcing subtractive bilingualism among multilingual Indigenous students. What suggestions do you have for higher education to preserve the use of minority languages?
So concretely in the programs, it is still not yet effective, but we have the project to propose Indigenous languages and cultures as an elective course in the program. So every student of the program should have the possibility to learn this language and culture, and according to the region of Caldas, this should be probably Embera that is proposed.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Dr. Soler would like to add something for this question.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I was not listening to you. What do you say?
If you would like to add something to the answer to this question about what can higher education institutions do to preserve native languages?
We already have, I mean, there is the project that my colleague mentioned for the teaching of, concretely, we talk about Embera Shami, that's like the first language that is planned to be taught at the university. But at this moment, from some time ago, we have the share of interculturality in the university. So we are already doing some work of about identity. But I would like, if I have time, I would like to say something. And it's last year we did another research with my colleague Yon at the University of Caldas, and with some interviews. Some students, it was very interesting and at the same time a little bit surprising, because some students, they don't like the idea that they have to be treated like their language has to be there, because they consider that their minority languages are not like the language of the future, are not the language of international contests. So some of them said like, no, it's not necessary. We need to learn Spanish, we need to learn English, French, but not necessarily those native languages that are not useful anymore. So sometimes they're against those strategies. And at the same time, we had some students who said like, we don't like to be seen or treated in a different way. So some students didn't understand why the university have to do like activities for these communities, for these minority languages, for these indigenous students. So some of them don't understand and don't like to have these kind of activities. But of course, it's not everybody, but some of the students.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting to see those conflicting views also of these students about their languages and the languages that the foreign languages that they have to learn or that they are learning. Well, thank you very much again, Professor Soler and Professor Brooks, for your presentation. And we're going to move on to the conversation now with all of the presenters this morning, and Professor Adriana Gonzalez is going to be guiding this conversation.
Okay, thank you, Janet, and thank you to our presenters, Germana Solera and Guillaume Gros. It's an honor to get to see the connections that your study has with various contexts. And we didn't plan to have all these interesting connections when we were organizing the event, because we didn't know all the details of your studies. But as we planned and we read the abstracts, we were delighted to see how in Colombia, many researchers in different contexts and in private and public universities are joining efforts to understand how multilingualism should be an important agenda in teacher education, not only for researchers, but also in the education of undergraduate and graduate teachers. So we are very happy to host this event. And as Janet said it at the beginning, our main objective is to explore how these issues of plurilingualism and multilingualism are in connection to not only looking for better alternatives to educate people, not only to support their personal and academic growth, but it's also a matter of social justice. And it's a matter of strengthening democracy in this broken country where we have been so separated for so many reasons, political reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, and of course, educational reasons. So this is a fantastic opportunity for all of us to see together how in the future we could be beginning to endeavors where we can join efforts and we can co-construct agendas between students and pre-service teachers, in-service teachers, university professors, and this local and global dialogue about how to make people's multilingualism not only more visible, but make it part of the open agendas in language education policies, in our curricula, at teacher education programs. And of course, if we could dream about having this impact in elementary education, in preschool education, in high school, not only in isolated communities, but as a national and international agenda. So thank you to all of you for being part of this interesting conversation, and to the audience for the provoking questions we have received. So, so today we will have Professor Angela Cris, we will have Professor Jaime Uzma, Professor Janet Ortiz, Professor Norbella Miranda, Professor Jose Aldemar Valencia, and Professor Germana Soler and Professor Guillaume Roux participating in this open conversation. It has been a little difficult for me to sort all the questions we have received, but I would like to start asking individual questions as we didn't have enough time. So there are some questions that go directly to some of the presenters, and then 2 or 3 probably questions to all, because part of this is to engage you from your perceptions, your experiences, your expertise, and the data you have shared with us around a common issue of multilingualism, plurilingualism, and of course, teacher education and language teaching and learning. Okay, so so this first question goes to Professor Angela Cris. Okay, someone in the audience is very interested in get to know how the use of translanguaging has been incorporated into teacher education, how this explicit approach to make it part of the repertoire and the skills that foreign language teachers could have.
Well, I'm afraid the answer to that is very short, because as far as I know, it hasn't been, which of course is very concerning. You know, I think still in Britain, we are in the process of still saying that, you know, when a bilingual teacher turns up to a teacher education program, that it's okay to use other languages in the classroom, because those teachers still think that, you know, languages, any other languages other than English, do not have a place in the classroom. And as part of teacher education in the UK, there is no training on either English, let alone bilingualism, but even English as an additional language. So, you know, we're not even in the game. I mean, the idea of talking about translanguaging is very far away from where the UK mainstream teacher education program is. Having said that, because of the opportunity that I've had to work with other countries and with colleagues around the world, I'm more familiar with success, for example, in universities in South Africa, universities in Colombia and in Lebanon, that project that Jaime mentioned earlier, where the teachers are changing the examination protocols, they're changing the pedagogies of their classroom, and for example, they're publishing in PhDs in other languages. So it's not that, obviously we know that translanguaging is kind of taking off in parts of the world, although it's still, as Ilana Shahami has very well pointed out, faces significant issues around assessment, particularly. Other countries in Europe are also more open to it. Sweden particularly has really taken it on. But I'm afraid in the UK, I can't even, we're nowhere near talking about a multilingual approach to teacher education.
Thank you for that insight. But I would like to know if you have any suggestions for our teacher education programs based on your experience and your enormous research and data on the benefits of translanguaging.
Well, the first thing I say, I'm not a teacher educator. I think that's important. So I'm not working with teachers at the moment. In fact, my research has gone on to look at translanguaging in other social contexts. But I do think, as many of the presentations this morning for you, this afternoon for me, has shown, is the importance of trying to make a difference in our own backyard, as it were. And so I have been trying to work with the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Internationalization at the University of Stirling to make our campuses more multilingual, including thinking about, the linguistic landscaping around us and, hearing the voices of our international students. We're very keen to take the funds from international students, but, their multilingualism is just, we just never hear it. So I think we can try to make a difference in that way. I think also what we have tried to do more recently is think about our work in terms of the arts. So we are really working with turning our work into play scripts and dramas and storytelling. So, so I'm not working directly with training primary and secondary school teachers, but I think there are ways that, each of us can respond to our own environments.
Thank you. Thank you. And those insights are very important for us, even if you're not currently working in a teacher education program, but you have enough data and knowledge about the topic, because we need to connect what the theories are with the practices, because many of us are familiar with Ofelia Garcia's work, and the theories have been entering little by little our teacher education programs at the pre-service and of course in the graduate programs. But it's good to see like a practical insights. Thank you for that.
Adriana, can I just add one more thing? Thank you, because you raised that. Of course, Ofelia Garcia's work has been tremendously important to my own, as has Li Wei and Juhua and others. One of the things that struck me as I listened to the presentations were the citations from particularly the United States and their scholars. And I just think there's so much tremendous work going on in the global South, particularly in places like South Africa, obviously, as well as Colombia. I mean, I already said that, and Latin America more generally. But, I think some of those kind of common experiences, they really would benefit from kind of those kind of exchanges. And so I just wanted to add that, really.
Thank you. Yes, we appreciate that comment, especially from the literature produced in the South. And this is one of our purposes. And in this master's program, we have a very critical stance of foreign language teaching and learning. And as part of our very open agenda is to use references from Colombian scholars, references from Latin American scholars, and not only from the global North. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, I have one question for Janet and Jaime. And as this is a very interesting topic, I would invite the other presenters if they want to jump into that conversation and add something, although the question was specifically addressed to them. So one person in the audience says that the experiences that you described about the activities you have developed with minority students could create some type of segregation between native students and mainstream groups of students, and maybe prevent from this interaction and not allowing for definitely understanding the minority students' diversity. What are your insights about that possible segregation that could appear? And I invite the other presenters if they want to add something to this question.
Jaime, would you like to start?
It all depends. Thank you, Adriana, for the question, and the person who asked the question. Yeah, it all depends on how you look at these issues. Because there is the risk of polarizing people, polarizing groups, and dividing. And I would say that something that we are learning from decolonial theories is that we need to look at the world in a more integrative way, recognizing diversity and valuing and promoting that diversity. And we are not going to do that if we continue looking at, continue dividing the country, dividing groups of people, dividing languages, dividing things. Something that we have to learn from the translanguaging perspective is, for example, that view of language not as isolated codes that we have here, but more as an integrative system that allow us to communicate in different ways for different purposes with different people. And that is also part of what we are trying to do, that knowledge, for example, is not that compartmentalized or divided like in boxes, that we can see the world in a more integrative way. So instead of talking about ethnicity from a like antagonist perspectives, where here we have the indigenous people, here we have the Afro, here we have the people who don't recognize as Afro or indigenous, instead of looking them as groups that are antagonists, what we are trying to promote is a view of how we can learn from each other and build together. Because if we are going to construct the world and the country that we need, where we can talk to each other and learn from each other, that is what we have to do, to learn from each other and to understand that there is a difference, but we can all contribute to the same goal in the same way with languages. As I said at the end of with the last question that we had, we are for languages. All languages are important. And we are against this idea that some languages are more important than others, and that to position some languages as here, the language of higher education, and then the other languages are additional. No, all of them are important for different purposes. So we are kind of, it's difficult. I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, because we are coming from that tradition of black and white divisions, etc. It's not easy, but we are getting there. And what we are learning from indigenous students, when they say, we want to learn English, but maybe not for the purposes that people are saying that we have to learn English, but we value the process and the language itself. But for what purpose? For our own purposes, from our own perspectives, etc. So we have to learn a lot from them, the same from other groups. Yeah, I hope I have communicated the message.
Thank you, Jaime. I see that Professor Soler, she would like to add her comments in this conversation. And I'm sorry, I missed the person who raised his or her hand before. So please let me know in the chat. Professor Soler?
Thank you. I don't know if Professor Janet wants to talk first, because it was the question first for them, if it is okay.
No problem, Professor Soler, go ahead.
I would like to make a very general comment, and I think the question is very interesting. I would like to go in a general way with I think the problem of the interculturality in Colombia is that segregation. We can see it in the official text, in the laws. When we talk about indigenous people, that they have the right to talk their language, to learn their language in their territories. So we do things for them, but we know that interculturality is like we have two cultures or more cultures, and we have to be together, we have to work together, we have to advance together. And what happens in Colombia is that indigenous can advance in their way, on their way, and the rest of Colombians, we are in the other way. So I think we need like a big change in that political dimension. And we do not, when I see and when I presented some of the works abroad and I talk about what is interculturality in Colombia officially, it's like surprising because that is not interculturality. So we need to work together to avoid that segregation. I think there is segregation in a very general way, and that has an impact in the universities. I gave the example of the University of Caldas when I was in my talk some minutes ago, and we have things for them. Of course, we have a good intention. It's not a bad intention that we have, but it's not a good thing, and some of those students feel it, and that's why they reject and they do not accept that kind of, I don't know if we say that in English, that kind of integration that we want to do with them is not the right thing. So I think we need a big change at the national level to avoid that segregation that goes in our institutions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned something that it's a very, or an argument that we use all the time when we analyze language education policies, something that we know comes from Professor Ilana Shuhami, that sometimes language education policies are very good intentions on paper, and that covers all languages, not only English and major Western languages, but also the education of minority languages. But the reality is different. So I'm sorry, Aldemar, yes, please. You would like to add something. I missed when you raised your hand, please.
No, I just did. I actually, Janet was first.
Thank you, Jose.
I'm sorry, Janet, please.
I wanted to add that we have had that discussion in our research team when we were going to open the course Aprender Inglés en la Universidad. We thought about, okay, but this course could be for all first semester students at the university. They are trying to find a place for themselves at the university and working on their identities and on positioning and empowering, like giving them those tools to position themselves more powerfully at the university and as English learners to comply with all of those demands. It would be useful for all students, and we are sure that's true. But if we see interculturality from our position in the world as Latin Americans, we should be aware of the fact that even though we, on the surface, accept that we are different, in practice, on a daily basis, we continue to exclude and discriminate people, not only because of their race and language, etc., but because of their sexual orientation and so on, like many other. So that's what we do, and many times we're not even aware of that. So from this view of interculturality, we need to be more aware of the individuals and peoples and communities that have been historically excluded. And indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombian peoples are some of those groups that have been historically excluded and annihilated. and starting to build those spaces of equal relations need to start by learning about them, who they are, because we cannot recognize someone about whom we don't know anything. And that's been the problem of our education. We haven't been educated to respect diversity. And as Paula Echeverry mentioned yesterday in her presentation, when she talked about the experience of her daughter learning about Colombian indigenous people, and this is taught like theory, like they're someone from the past, and we've had that experience at the university. Students in our language classes talking about indigenous students as if they were very far away from the university. Once I had a student, a female indigenous student in my class, and she got very mad when hearing her classmates talking about indigenous people as if they were aliens. And she hadn't, up to that point, she had never dared to reveal her indigenous identities in the class because she didn't want to be discriminated or treated differently. And she had told me, don't tell them I am from an indigenous community. And that day she got so mad that she spoke to me after class and she said, Janet, I want to tell them who I am. I want to tell them that I'm part of this class and that I speak a different language. They have to know that I'm here, that I'm not part of the past. And she decided to share her identity in class. So I think that is why we decided that we're gonna work with indigenous students, because we have observed that they have, there is a very small number of indigenous students and Afro-Colombian students having access to the university. And they have, of course, they have many difficulties they share with other students, but they have, let's say, less opportunities to be able to develop and comply with all of those demands at the university. And that's a decision that we made consciously, because we only have, one team that can work with one or two groups of students. So we said, we're going to prioritize that. And of course, that's why our work doesn't end there. That's why we are trying to offer other courses for this course also as a complementary course for students at the undergraduate level, so that other students in different programs can also access it. But it's just the beginning. And our students in this course have also told us, I think I would like my classmates in the engineering program or in the social studies program to be doing a course like this with me, because they also need to learn about who we are and we also need to learn about them. It's a matter of building interculturality with everyone. That's the idea. So I think that goes in the direction that Dr. Carolina just mentioned it a minute ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Before I ask Jose Aldemar to join us, probably all of you saw Professor Chris's comment about how to address this issue of diversity and maybe talking about difference. But this is not an easy task. As all of you have experienced in your research, the conflicts that appear even when indigenous students or minority speakers of languages emerge into the classrooms. And what about their identities as multilingual speakers or as Colombians or as members of a specific group? This is very conflicting, not only for how we, the others, let's say, we look at them or how they see themselves and how we interact. So this is just the beginning of the conversation, but just clarifying the terminology and looking at the different positions is a very good start for all of us. So Jose Aldemar?
Yeah, really, I'm not sure if I will be able to be clear, because this is something that I'm trying to even understand myself. When you work with indigenous communities, they have political agendas, and there's so much going on that we don't understand. For example, going with the discourse of we want peace, we want diversity, we want, which is what Catherine Walsh calls functional this functional interculturality, you know, like I understand you, you kind of understand me, then we tolerate each other, we live good and so on. And I'm thinking that maybe, you know, like it's not that they oppose that view, but it's also that they distrust a lot of our good intentions. And I'm speaking from our experience in the project we have been conducting. You know, we engaged with the community, and there's always at the beginning a lot of distrust. You know, even if you say I got good intentions, they always think like we don't really know what those intentions, what underlies those good intentions. You know, and the discourse of we want, you know, we want diversity and inclusion and all of those things, that doesn't always jive with them. They distrust many of those discourses, you know. And then I think it's I love the word they use, tejido, you know, tejido. How they, instead of saying inclusion, I think the word tejido, we should use the word tejido, because it's not that I want to include you, is how we build that tapestry together, right? And weave it. And then the interaction will tell us how this is going to play out. And this is what I've been feeling. And I've been thinking of a distinction between thinking decolonial and feeling decolonial, being decolonial. I think ourselves as academics, we think decolonially, right? But maybe we don't feel, or we don't feel decolonial, because as one Bolivian, Ansaldu, I think she says, the intercultural, critical intercultural perspective, or the colonial perspective of indigenous communities, it stands in the colonial wound, right? So their locus of enunciation, the locus of being, is very different from us. You know, we cannot feel what they feel, right? Think, for example, of Misak, the Pueblo of Misak in Colombia. They have a different perspective of time. You know, for them, future, they see future. They see future. They see the in front. They don't see the future. They see the past, which is basically a good way of never forgetting what happened to them. You know. And that's why they have all the history that's behind them. They don't forget it because someone comes and talks nicely to me, right? They have that. So and so what I think is they have an agenda that is more emancipatory, right? Not necessarily functional, which is the perspective of let's be good, let's be friends, let's include you, and all of that. So I think we could have those intentions, but we really have to be, as Janet said, this dialogue has to be guided in part by their interests, needs, and also by our good intentions. But I think it has to be very good intentions. There's so much criticism about the idea of dressing up with the colonial dress, you know. And so that's what I'm saying, the difference between thinking the colonial and feeling decolonial.
Thank you, Aldemar. And Ana Maria Sierra just mentioned here in a conversation with Jaime that it's not just having the intentions or the thoughts of being decolonial, but she says also, how do we act? And are we consequent with all these epistemological approaches and through diversity, understanding, and so on and so forth? And there are major challenges, because when we think about the epistemologies of, for example, minority groups, there will be issues that would impact the scholarship at the university level. We know that many students that come from those indigenous groups come from an oral tradition, and they find it very difficult to begin writing academic texts, even in Spanish or in English. So have we ever just considered that it would be possible just to, for example, defend a thesis or a dissertation, and the dissertation is presented orally or through different types of representations, not the traditional tools we have used? So those are just some thoughts, just to consider the complexity of what we are mentioning here, okay? there's one question that now goes to Professor Norbella and Jose Aldemar about the research at Universidad del Valle. In a few minutes, I will address two questions that are open to everyone, and I think they're very provocative, especially in the connection between English as a major language that all our students have to learn, and how this interacts with diversity and multilingualism. Okay, let me just please for a second. So this goes to Norbella and Aldemar. So in your research, did you get to know how many of minority students from indigenous groups would like to learn their own language, and why? Because as you mentioned, many of them come to the university feeling that they do not speak their community language, and if that's part of your data.
Norbella, could you do it? Could you answer this one?
I think it was part of your presentation, but you have the numbers exactly. But yes, most of the students want to know their indigenous languages, and not only the one from their communities, but also other indigenous languages. They do want to learn that.
Yeah, what I said is that 80% of the participants of the research, remember, how research is. We only have out of 1,200 students, we have only the 10%. And out of those, 80% says that they would like to learn their indigenous languages or the languages from the community at the university, right? So, like the point we made is how the university has become a place for them to feel that there is the possibility to revitalize the languages, and also their cosmogonies. So I think that's really important is telling the university, okay, like we have the willingness, to be part of this process. What can you do for us and with us? Because obviously, is not a mestizo is not going to teach their language. Is the community, someone from the community who's going to do that.
Something that we did learn is that they want to do this like in their own terms. Like they want to decide what teachers they are going to have, for example, and the content and all that. So we need to acknowledge that too.
Thank you. So maybe the other presenters would have an additional comment, as all the universities have these programs to revitalize indigenous languages, and of course, part of the initiatives go hand in hand with the recovery of historical memory of the indigenous communities. Maybe Universidad de Caldas or Universidad Antioquia. Anything else to add?
At the University of Antioquia, these initiatives trying to validate different forms of knowledge and languages and struggles of minoritized groups have been like taking more strength in the last years. And there is a set of courses that are offered to students, faculty, and staff on, for example, indigenous thought, thought from the Raizal people in San Andres Island, and different languages like Wayunaiki and Minica, different courses that intend to vindicate these different types of knowledge and struggles. And something very particular is that, for example, in the case of courses of ancestral languages, which are also taught as part of the multilingual program at the university, most students are that register for those courses do not come from indigenous communities. They are students and teachers and other people at the university that want to know about these languages and that want to know about these forms of knowledge. So that's very particular, but there are several initiatives that have been, gaining strength at the university, and that's something very, very positive.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So there's a question that our audience in YouTube is sending us, and I think it's very interesting, and it coincides with one of the questions I had before, so I'm going to read directly what the person says. It's addressed to all of you. It's to all of you. So what recommendations would you have to address the need to consolidate a plurilingualism, interculturality, and cultural diversity in the classroom?
Do you want me to start? I just think we just need to open our eyes and listen better and observe better, and then understand that we are living in a very diverse country in multiple ways, and there are multiple possibilities of being in a university, being in a classroom, being in a school. Multiple possibilities. There are multiple ways, and we just need to start observing better. We have no answers for many of the questions that people may have, and we also may have, because we are just starting. We represent in Colombia some groups that are very colonialized in the way we see the world, because most of us have been educated following certain traditions. What we are trying to do is to question even ourselves. And for many of those things, we don't have answers. I would say that this symposium, more than just telling people what to do, is an invitation to open our eyes, listen better, observe better, and question ourselves. And then everyone will start like finding answers in their own ways, because that's what we are trying to do with Norvegia, Jose, and Jimena, for example, in the network. But with many people, it's just asking questions and seeing what we can do from Bati, that we can learn from them, what they can learn from us, etc. And the same with Universidad de Sucre, with Jimena. So that's more than anything. That would be my answer. That there is no answer. I understand. I would say that French people, teachers of French in Colombia, and this is what we are doing with the courses we are doing with teachers, is just asking questions, and French teachers are asking these questions to themselves. English teachers are asking those questions to themselves, etc. So that would be my contribution.
Thank you, Jaime. Anybody else?
I would like to make a comment.
Sure, Professor. Yes.
I think we need like concrete actions, and one of the things, it was another a research, that the same research we did last year, when we were looking for knowing about the lacks of interculturality. Some of the things, the first things that we got is that teachers and students do not know what interculturality is. So one of the first things we have to do is to educate. And it's very common, at least at the University of Caldas, to have that analogy between culture and interculturality. So if we as teachers, we don't know what interculturality is, it's not possible to teach and to talk about intercultural communication and education. I think it's one of the first things we need to do to avoid that confusion between culture, because we have that tendency to generalize. So we include everything in culture, and that's one of the concrete things we can do.
Thank you. Jose Aldemar, you said you would like to add something.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues, and Jaime especially, when he says we have to, be attentive. We have to be open. We have to be willing to recognize the intersectionality of identities of our students, not only the linguistic identities, but also the gender, the sex, the religion, politics, and so on. All of the types of identities which I consider are cultural semiotic resources of students who bring to the classroom, and in many cases because of our own biases, which we don't recognize. As Jaime was saying, we have to recognize our biases, and also we have to recognize our position, our position that we historically have been given as the mestizo dominant group. And I think if another big strategy in the classroom is to expand, and then in here I'm drawing on Denise Newfield from South Africa and Pippa Stein from South Africa, where they worked with multimodal pedagogies, and they talk about resourcing students' resources. You know, how can we resource the resources that our students bring to classes, but in many cases they are not recognized because they are not part of the mainstream, right? So, that can be done by expanding students' representational means. That's why a multimodality comes in pretty handy here, you know, open possibilities for them to express, represent who they are in different ways. And for this, you really have to be open. I'm just gonna give you one example that happened to me last semester. I had a class on pedagogy and in the undergrad program. And I'm working with multimodal pedagogies, and we do a lot of, you know, creation of multimodal texts where they can bring in their own in many ways. And I have an activity where they introduce themselves through using multimodal texts. And at the beginning, I kind of like perceived like two students it sounded like they were indigenous, like they belonged to an indigenous community, but they didn't say anything. You know, when I talked about and they gave their presentations, they never talked about being indigenous. They avoided the topic. And through the semester, through the different activities we had indigenous. We had a section on indigenous pedagogies and education, and we had guests from the indigenous cabildos in my class. And at the end, they did a project. One of them came up with a project of the 21st classroom for indigenous students. And I said, well, this is unexpected. Like, why are you talking about this? And so I didn't say anything in class, and another student came with another project for indigenous students. And I said, I'm gonna ask them. So after class, later, after the semester, I sent them out a message asking like, hey, you know, I noticed that at the beginning, you never talked about indigenous or belonging to an indigenous community. And at the end, you did some projects on indigenous. And is this, could you tell me about this? And then she says, yeah, well, I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel, you know, like welcome. But as the semester went on, and all of this openness to all of these different topics and to the indigenous topic and identities, it motivated me to open up. And this is why, and then they say like, this has been very good because I could discover a lot about myself, about my indigenous identity. So, and then I think these are the pedagogies we have to bring into our classrooms, you know, just allowing them to, at some point, come out and say, I don't have any problems with expressing my identity, which is terrible that they don't do it. That speaks of how the university is very colonial. But one way of combating this is expanding representational possibilities and resourcing those resources that they think they are not valid in classrooms.
Okay, thank you, Aldemar. Some people here in the audience are very curious to see what Professor Angela Kreis thinks about this question. And of course, as we're promoting dialogue, we have let you aside in the conversation. We have given you very little room as we are so passionate in this discussion. So I remind you the question, what are your recommendations to address this need to consolidate plurilingualism, interculturality, and cultural diversity in the classrooms?
Okay, well, first of all, I don't feel left out. I'm really enjoying the conversation. I find it extremely interesting. I think, okay, I would like to say that what I would like to see introduced in the classroom is a syllabus much more based around dilemma, ambiguity, contradiction, and contingency. That is, I think we need to think about, as I kind of started to indicate in my chat, that I think we have to think about difference as both a kind of social category, which we usually talk about in terms of diversity, and we start to do intersectionality, and we start to name kind of groups and big sociolinguistic factors. And we need to move to something much more, which is around difference as a kind of individual feature that we all have, and to know that we are always in a kind of dilemma about our positioning in relation to all kinds of things, and everything is always shifting. So I really think we need to start to think about our curriculum, not in terms of, what our teachers should know, but what kind of people they might want to become. And, that is all around thinking about things as, extremely fluid and as I say, around contingency. And I also think as teachers, we've got to get outside our disciplinary expertise and think in an interdisciplinary way. So one of the things that I've become really interested in lately is humanism of the other, the work of Jewish scholar Emmanuel Levinas, and he really talks about other ways of talking about difference, which I find just kind of mind-blowing and really kind of a new way for me to start to deal with diversity and difference, because I think that's one of the kind of driving forces that, well, Jose put it very well, and Jaime, thinking about where we're coming from, of course, but kind of making the other, the person that we're not in a reciprocal arrangement with, they're our focus, they're our, that's where we are kind of in a contract, in a service to, I don't know, I didn't say that last bit very well, but I really think we should be kind of thinking about other ways of talking about difference. And until we do that, our curriculum will be stuck, I think, around groups and social categories, which I think are not going to be tremendously useful.
Thank you. You have addressed a very interesting point, especially coming from your area of research, which is not directly related to teacher education. But you have informed us about the need to look at broader categories, probably coming from philosophy. And I, as to what you said, I just thought about Martha Nussbaum's concept of compassion, and how she addresses that compassion is not just being pitiful or feeling that people, oh, poor you, poor little thing. So this is a very complex concept that we need to embrace, because that involves understanding that for a very interesting point of view in which I respect the other, and I, of course, value myself of an interlocutor in this construction of the world. And of course, other categories that emerge as human development, as she proposes this. And one of the important issues that she has said to education, especially in higher education, is how are we educating human beings? What you just said. What kind of other parts of knowledge are we providing them with? What about arts? What about philosophy? What about history? Because some of our programs have been so compartmentalized for some time that they become technical experts in the field, but what about the other connections? And what about the human dimension, which is something very, very interesting. Thank you for that comment. Okay, Janet, I'm sorry, I know you're raising your hand, but we have only 10 minutes, and I have one question from YouTube. Maybe you could begin addressing that concern, and another one about English teaching for all of you. So we have this conversation or this question that really connects to what you said about the agendas and the polarization in the country and the different positions that we may have and even the good intentions, versus the realities of the policies and the appropriation of the policies at various levels. So this person would like to know, how can we just have this different approach in one holistic, integral approach in terms of ending up with the polarization? Should the government take the initiative, or should we, like common people, the educational system, educational actors, should be the first ones taking this step? And maybe Janet, as you raised your hand, or any other.
Okay, I'm glad with that question, Adriana. I can make connections to what I was going to say earlier, and also in total agreement with what Professor Angela said. I think we need to start. We can't wait for institutions or government to make changes, because they're not going to make changes that reveal that are in tune with what people, individuals, and communities need. They have different purposes, so we have to set our own agendas. And I would say the starting point in those agendas that we need to plan and project, it's self-reflection, a little bit in the direction of what Jaime, or I would say in the same direction that Jaime was mentioning at the beginning of this conversation. And it's that it's not about following new theories. It's not about saying you are decolonial or saying you work with interculturality. It's about being open to question your own beliefs, to be aware of your own biases, as also Professor Aldemar mentioned it, and to also bring those contradictions and dilemmas you have to the conversation with your students, because it's not that because conflict and contestation and contradiction is what makes part of our lives. And that's why I totally agree with what Professor Angela says. But I would say self-reflection, it's at the core to start thinking about, okay, what other opportunities can I create in my classes and in my work as a teacher educator and in my work as a researcher, if I question my practices and my beliefs, and I also enter in this dialogue with others around me, with my students, with other researchers, with my colleagues. If I'm also like trying to participate in this conversation and seeing other perspectives and discussing all those contradicting issues. So I think we have to start by that in order to then come up with specific agendas in which we share purposes, and when we try to promote transformations at the small level. I would say small in our classrooms, but then that would become that would have a greater impact little by little, and of course with our work as researchers as well.
Thank you, Janet. And we have Professor Guillaume Roux, who would like to add something.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will try to give a global answer. I will start with interculturality, and I will finish with language policy in the country. So what we can see in our project, in comparison to the precedent project, is that, for example, students want to use native languages in classes. Yet the former project, as my colleague said, Germana said, some students don't want specific activities for them. So we have the problem of interculturality. What is it? In the definitions interculturality is always a transitional step. This is why we have critical interculturality, inclusive interculturality, or other authors mention co-culturality, etc. This is always transitional because we have to do more. We have to go forward. And we are working, that's why we are working on the concept of intraculturality. The solution we have in class is that not only, for example, indigenous students speak a native language, but we have to make non-indigenous students speak a native language. This is why should work interculturality and intraculturality. Why intraculturality? Because according language policy and planning in the country, there is a discrimination because interculturality for ethnic groups is only a one-sided interculturality, only for ethnic groups. And this is why we should consider the rest of the people. We are in a very specific context. We speak about university, we are teachers or students, and I think we all agree here to do more for the inclusion of ethnic groups. But we didn't present here the results of our interviews because we did not finish the analysis. But if we interview people who don't belong to the university context, the thing is different. When we interview other people who have nothing to do with the university, we have other things. And what we find is in relation with the work of, for example, Theon van Dijk on Latin America, who showed that there is a kind of ordinary racism in political discourses and media. And I will give you an example, what we find when we interview other people. The question is about identity. What is the Colombian identity? When these people speak about the colonization, they say that the colonization made them a lot of bad things. They destroyed them, and they speak with the term us, nosotros. Nos hicieron mucho daño. They damaged us a lot. What is us? Us is really strange here because these people are not indigenous people or Afro-descendant people. They are descendant directly of European immigration or colonization, or they are mestizos. They are not direct descendants of indigenous people. The question is the identity. And when these people speak about indigenous people, a lot of them, all of them no, but a lot of them have negative representations about indigenous people. They are bad people. They are violent towards the police, etc. In the discourse of people we find outside the university, the things are different. And that's that kind of ideology we find in the language policy and planning. There is a kind of ordinary discrimination in relation to the identity. What is the Colombian identity? This is why we are working on. We want to promote the fact that there is one Colombian culture, one Colombian identity. But inside it, there is a lot of diversity. And our goal is to make that every student consider that every culture and language in Colombia belong to its own heritage. This is our goal. But to conclude that point about policies, that's why we speak about the former social linguistic models, because there are models in history that were successful in Israel, in Catalonia. These are successful models, and in the case of Catalonia, not necessarily coming from the top, coming from government. There is militantism. There is actions from the people, but the problem here I see still, it's the number of indigenous people, the number of professors, the number of students is really low. We are not a lot of people thinking like this, because when we see what other people think, this is really different. So we have to be more to act, and we have to consider that we have to change also other people. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I am extremely sorry to say that our discussion has passed 2 minutes of the deadline we had. I know Professor Norbella wanted to add something else, but I need to be very organized with the timing. And just to close, I want to thank all of you for your participation, for your insights, for sharing your research, for provoking us with different perspectives with your questions. And of course, as we have agreed on, there are more questions than answers. And we need to embrace new paradigms, new ways of thinking, of understanding theory, of creating theory, new dialogues that probably will cause a lot of ambiguity, and something that we need to take into account, because it's an interesting way to create knowledge. So on behalf of the master's program in foreign language teaching and learning and the organizing committee, I want to thank all the participants for your questions, for your comments, for engaging in the conversations in the chat. I am sorry I couldn't address all the questions. I had 3 bigger questions addressing English and the way we need to approach English and other languages, but the conversation was so good that it was very hard to stop it. So thank you all of you for this, and we appreciate your time and your expertise. Now Janet will probably close the event. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Adriana, for guiding this conversation that was really interesting and insightful. I would like to thank our presenters during the event. Yesterday and today have been like very, very enriching opportunities for all of us, I'm sure. And we have, I guess, accomplished our objective of getting to know about what we're doing in the different contexts of our guests, learning from the experiences in the UK and in Israel, and how you also are like working hard on these agendas to render visible of those languages and identities of people in those different contexts. And in Colombia, the projects that we have been doing at the different universities, of course, we find a lot of commonalities as well and a lot to do. And that was the idea, like getting to know what we're doing and learning from all of these experiences, and hopefully, of course, continue with these conversations in other spaces so that we can consolidate new initiatives and find ways to work collaboratively. So again, thank you all. Thank you very much to all of our presenters for having made this event possible. Dr. Elana Shohami, Dr. Angela Cris, Dr. Jose Aldemar Alvarez, Dr. Norbella Miranda, Jaime Uzma, Dr. Germana Soler, Guillaume Bruce, Dr. Isabel Tejada, Amparo Clavijo, all of you, thank you for making this possible. Maure Aguirre, who also was with us today in our presentation. And to all the professors, alumni, and students from the master's program who also collaborated in organizing the event, and our programs committee as well. The professors also from the Foreign Language Teacher Education Program that are also present. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again in other academic spaces that we will be sharing with you and inviting you as well. Thank you very much. And bye-bye.
Ciao, Janet. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming to the event. Thank you, Angela.